But come.
Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The event will begin shortly. Please feel free to take your seats and please be reminded to turn your mobile phones into silent mode during today's proceedings. We also ask you to please scan this QR code on the screen. Yeah, we also ask you to please scan this QR code on the screen and try out our game that Ideas developed together with Digital Public Square. So this game is called Pantau Dana Politik, which is both an educational tool as well as a survey to gauge the public's acceptance of Political Financing Act, which is one of Ideas' primary reform goals. Also on your table, there are two QR codes. One will allow you to submit questions during our panel discussions, and the other QR code will take you to the event guide, which includes the agenda for today, speakers' profiles, as well as Ideas' social media accounts. So please do follow us. We also have the link to the game that I mentioned just now, which is Pantau Dana Politik. So do check it out, play around with it, share with your friends, family, and professional networks. We thank you for your kind cooperation. Please bear with us. We're just waiting for the VIP to come in. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to take your seats. The event will begin now. Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Ala Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Founding President of Ideas Malaysia. Yang Berusaha Dr. Trisha Yeo, Chief Executive Officer of Ideas Malaysia. His Excellency Wayne Robson, High Commissioner of Canada. His Excellency B.N. Reddy, High Commissioner of India. Board of Directors of Ideas Malaysia. Dr. Stefan Diedrich, Project Director for Indonesia and Malaysia of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, FNF. Esteemed speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Mencari timba si anak dara di bawah sarang burung tempua. Salam sembah pembuka bicara. Selamat datang untuk semua. Selamat pagi and good morning. On behalf of Ideas Malaysia, welcome to the Malaysia Outlook Conference 2024, Ensuring Stability Delivers. On behalf of Ideas Malaysia, we would like to thank and express our gratitude to our partners, Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom and the High Commission of Canada in Malaysia for their support towards the Malaysia Outlook Conference and Ideas. Daun semulur di Pekansari, batang jerami rebah ke bumi, madah dihulur, sembah diberi, kata perasmi hajatnya kami. Without further ado, to begin today's proceedings, may I please have the pleasure of inviting Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Ala Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Founding President of Ideas Malaysia, for the welcoming remarks.
You. And I'd like to know a very good morning, your facilities that are more than finished yet. I'm pleased to welcome you all to our upbeat here. There is the...
This is not on. There we are. I'll start again. Your Excellencies, fellow board members, colleagues, distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our Outlook conference this year because there is indeed a lot to look out for. The blurb for today's event points out that after a bruising general election, 6 state elections, numerous by-elections, and a cabinet reshuffle, Malaysians are finally feeling a sense of political stability. But I fear that this may be an overstatement. Already we have seen how in the last few months, MPs elected to the opposition seats have declared their loyalty to the Prime Minister, and now their original parties are attempting to force by-elections through a change in their constitutions. And should this happen, we will have a repeat of that instability, a resurgence of the rhetoric of race and religion that is so distracting to the development of our economy and the improvement of our institutions. Naturally, there will be much frustration among those of us who seek reform and much agitation among party members about who to blame. I think as reformists, we should always aim to address the root causes of things. And in the matter of these MPs apparently switching loyalty, they universally say that the cause is unequal constituency development funding. They switched sides in order to access more money for their constituents. How noble and considerate of them. But if indeed this is true, then the solution to stopping MPs from switching sides is to ensure that MPs get the same level of funding, regardless of which party they belong to. That is fair, logical, and democratic. And that is what we tell the government. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we see in Malaysia, just as we see around the world, that once politicians who may have been noble and principled advocates and activists in the past themselves get a hold on power, the reforms that they so vocally championed are suddenly of less importance to them. They see policies and practices as mere tools to be used to keep themselves in power. So we see the same disparity of concern when it comes to being enraged about the economy or the pathetic state of the ringgit or the corruption cases of their newfound political allies. Of course, like many in the audience, I have friends on both sides of the aisle, and so I understand the political pressures of opposing for opposition's sake, and I sympathize with the pressures of having an activist turned minister now having to compromise. But this is why civil society must continue to be resilient, to speak without fear or favor. For we, at least those of us not chasing political office for the time being, are not interested in personal glory. We are interested in improving our country, and we don't need to take the credit for it. There is no electoral dividend. We want to normalize debates about improving public policy based on evidence and best practice. And for now, I feel confident that think tanks and NGOs have become a permanent part of the fabric of Malaysian democracy. And that's why I'm so proud of my team here at Ideas. They slog throughout the year, working to research and advocate on so many unsexy areas of policy, with only the hope that government, whether this one or a future one, will take notice and implement our recommendations. We are helped by some of the democratic reforms that have already taken place, in particular the establishment of parliamentary select committees and all-party parliamentary groups, which means that backbench YBs finally have a role to play in the formulation of policy in a cross-party basis. I have to say I have been pleasantly surprised by the gusto with which some YBs have become experts on, say, political finance reform or refugee rights, independently forming views that may be different from their party leaders. This shift in the role of being a legislator marks a permanent change in the way a YB thinks of their job, and this improves Malaysian democracy for the better. Of course, Malaysia may be much affected by developments elsewhere, with 76 countries scheduled to hold elections at various levels this year. I was just in Brazil, which is chairing the G20 summit this year, and BRICS and COP30 next year. I was surprised at the enthusiasm they have for Malaysia, driving home the point that we need to get our own house in order for us to be more effective on the global stage. I hope that today's interlocutors will illuminate and provoke debate. As ever, I thank our sponsors, in particular today, the Canadian High Commission, and I wish all attendees a great day ahead. So thank you, and wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You're studying that.
Thank you to Kuzain for the welcoming remarks. Now, we would like to invite Mr. Apurva Sanghi, lead economist for Malaysia at the World Bank, to deliver the keynote address.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Ideas for this invitation, and it's a pleasure indeed to be here. Now, I'm going to start off with a brief overview of what's happening in the global economy. And people often actually refer to me as a walking global economy. You know why? My hairline is in recession. My stomach's a victim of inflation. And together, that puts me in a great depression. So you have the walking global economy in front of you. Now, show of hands, please. If you've heard of Elvis Presley, or if you're an Elvis fan, just raise your hand. Okay, practically everyone. Now, Elvis once sang, "We're caught in a trap." The song Suspicious Minds, "We're caught in a trap." Now, had Elvis made it as an economist, today he would sing, "We are caught in a low growth, low investment, low cooperation trap." Let me elaborate a few sentences on each. Low growth. So we, the World Bank, expect global growth to slow down to 2.4% this year. This will be the third consecutive deceleration. We're in the slowest half decade of growth in the last 30 years. Low investment. Investment cycles world over have been rudely disrupted by high interest rates. And low cooperation. We, the World Bank, we counted over 3,000 new restrictions imposed on global trade in 2022. This is 3 times more than in 2019. So trade is fragmented like never before. So the global environment is a somber one. And the two economies that Malaysia is most sensitive to are the US and China. Now, we crunched the numbers, and I won't bore you with them, but found interestingly that even though China is Malaysia's largest trading partner, it is changes in the US economy that have a much greater impact on the Malaysian economy than China does. It's probably because the US economy is still about a quarter bigger than China's, and over 80% of Malaysian trade is still invoiced in US dollars. So the upshot of all this is that this is going to be a topsy-turvy year. In fact, I like to think of this year as an economic version of Michel Yeoh's Everything Everywhere All at Once. And the question is, what can Malaysia do? Well, first and foremost, sticking to the theme of the conference, it can ensure and deepen stability. But what stability are we talking about? Is it political stability or policy stability? Now, as Tunku Zain so articulately highlighted, Malaysia has been through one heck of a roller coaster ride. 4 prime ministers in 4 years, a truly, genuinely first coalitional government, and going back the seminal 2018 GE results that turned the page on an era of political stability. And the common view is that political stability in Malaysia hurts the economy. But does that have to be the case? So take neighboring Thailand, which has been subject to multiple coups and political changes. Yet there's been remarkable policy stability in terms of tax policies, business regulatory frameworks, adherence to prudent macro buffers, and so on. So what was Thailand's driver of policy stability? Well, it stemmed from after the Asian financial crisis, which etched never again in the Thai DNA. And so technocrats and laws kept the macro intact. And that made the comeback stronger than the setback. Peru is another poster child of political instability. 10 presidents since 2000. 6 presidents in less than 6 years. 1 took his life. Others are either in prison, absconding, or pilloried because of corruption charges. Yet, in the 2 decades since 2000, Peru has managed stable fiscal policies and relatively strong growth. What was Peru's stability driver? So when I talk to my World Bank colleagues who work in Peru, they talk about how they have worked with 3 different administrations in Peru, but their technical counterparts in key ministries have been the same, with many being promoted based on merit. They praise the highly competent central banker who served through various administrations. So in essence, Peru's stability driver, I guess you could argue, is meritocracy and technical competence. The caliber of technocrats, how they are appointed, retained, and promoted. Take Poland, which over the last 30 years has changed governments about 20 times or so, but is stuck to its reform trajectory and reached high income status only after 15 years of becoming middle income. In contrast, Malaysia has been stuck in a middle income trap for over 30 years. What was Poland's stability driver? Well, it was external, accession to the EU, which bound the hands of future administrations to come. The examples go on, but my message here is Not to say that political instability does not matter. Of course it does, especially for long-term thinking, but it need not always translate into policy instability if you ensure and deepen these stability drivers that I alluded to. And I would submit that Malaysia has many, but not all, of these stability drivers. So for example, it was a civil service here, warts and all, that kept the country on a stable footing during tumultuous political times. Malaysia is subject to various regional and global treaties that serve somewhat as an external policy anchor, and so on. But it's also important to recognize that stability is necessary but not sufficient. Stability is only a prerequisite to growth, and Malaysia needs more growth. And today I want to highlight Malaysia's untapped growth drivers, not the usual ones that you'll hear in every other conference, the commodities, E&E, tourism, etc., but rather those that don't get much talked about, yet have the potential to fundamentally alter Malaysia's growth trajectory. And I group them under what I call the 3 S's. So the first S is subnational. Now, many countries, including neighboring Philippines and Indonesia, have benefited from fiscal and functional decentralization to subnational entities, states, cities, municipalities, etc. But Malaysian states hardly have any fiscal autonomy. They really can't raise their own taxes or issue debt in markets. Now, of course, decentralization has to be done carefully, but it is striking that in 2024, if you need to open a school or a hospital in Kelantan or Sabah, you still need to come knocking on Puterajaya's doors. This breeds excessive federal dependency and undermines local development. It's also telling that of the 13 states and 3 federal territories in Malaysia, only 4 are above our World Bank high income threshold. So even if Malaysia became high income, most Malaysians would ask, how come I live in a rich country when my state is poor? So unlocking growth at subnational levels is one untapped and overlooked growth driver for Malaysia. The second S I call services. Now take the NIMP, the National Industrial Master Plan, which is a rather nice roadmap to boost sagging investment in Malaysia. And even though the I in NIMP stands for industrial, it is services, financial, digital, legal, accounting, logistics, which will play an equally vital role in actualizing the NIMP's goals. Yet, services remain highly restrictive in Malaysia. It is telling that a lawyer from Peninsular Malaysia cannot practice in Sabah or Sarawak. Now, I know there are reasons for that, but services are restrictive. And the overall statistics bear this out. Of 50-odd countries that the OECD studies, Malaysia is the 8th most services trade restrictive country. And as a point of reference, Japan is the least. So services are another untapped growth driver. Now, one area where Malaysia is poised to take off in services is Islamic finance. As many of you may know, Malaysia was the very first country in the world to issue a green sukuk. Now, Islamic finance is based on Islamic principles of justice, fairness, transparency. But I'd like to make the point that these principles are not Islam-specific. They're universal in nature. So scaling up tools such as zakat and wakaf can lead to growth that is balanced, sustainable, and inclusive, which is what the entire world, not just the Muslim world, needs. Moving on to the third S, sustainability. Now, a lot has been said in this area, but let me make one overlooked point. In this region, in Southeast Asia, it is Malaysia and Indonesia, the only 2 countries that have forests at scale. So how well Malaysia manages its forests can be beneficial, not just nationally, but regionally and globally. And here I must applaud Malaysia's use of EFTs, ecological fiscal transfers, which are federal fiscal transfers to incentivize states to better take care of the biodiversity. Indeed, Malaysia is one of the few countries innovating on this frontier, but a lot more can be done to unlock the sustainability growth driver. So to sum up so far, political stability or policy instability? So political instability does not need to translate into policy instability, but stability is necessary and not sufficient. And these three S's, subnational services, sustainability, underpinned by stability, can really help unlock Malaysia's growth potential. Now I'm going to switch gears a bit. For this talk, I polled Malaysians through a small platform you might have heard of, formerly known as Twitter, suggestions on how to make a boring economist's talk less boring. And two themes came up repeatedly: implementation and Malaysia's value proposition. So Malaysians wanted to hear my views on these two topics. What do I view are the implementation issues in Malaysia, and what do I think of as Malaysia's value proposition? And that's what I'm going to conclude with. So let's talk implementation. I want you all to play along with me. I'm going to ask you a very simple riddle. Don't overthink it. It is a trick question, so just go with your gut. There are 3 birds sitting on a tree branch, 3 birds. 2 of them decide to fly away. How many are left?
What?
1, it's a trick question. The instinct is to say 1. So 3 birds decide to fly away. How many are left? 1. The answer is still 3. Why? Because there's a difference between deciding and doing. All right? And this is Malaysia's problem. Malaysia has many roadmaps and plans and blueprints, etc., but it gets stuck at the implementation stage, because implementation is where the policy rubber hits the rockyard's road. To rattle off some statistics, there are 17 odd agencies that provide over 160 plus social assistance programs. There are over 70 agencies for skills training, over 30 agencies for SME digitalization. And let me give you a very specific example. Take something as apolitical as preschooling. Now, one ministry collects data on preschools, another on childcare, but hardly any efforts are made to combine these 2 data sets. And because many operators run both childcare and preschools, they need to get separate licenses from both ministries. Not only that, they're also required to have separate premises with separate entrances. And the obvious outcome, in case you didn't already guess it, is that many private preschools operate without licenses, making them illegal. Now, overlapping mandates and working in silos and excessive fragmentation are obvious reasons for poor implementation, but there is another often overlooked one, and that is the lack of a culture of independent monitoring and evaluation in Malaysia. I firmly believe that, and I've been in the development business, I guess you could say since the day I was born. I was born in a developing country, and that's been my passion throughout. And one thing I realize is that development is a game of snakes and ladders. There is no quick cut, copy, and paste. So experimentation is necessary and required. You may not know how things work, you go and experiment. That is fine. But so is learning. I laud many government initiatives that have been launched in the 2 years I've been here. But I ask, where is the impact evaluation of such programs that allow us to learn and improve? How do we know if a policy failed? If a policy failed, it was because we may not have known enough, because we were wrong, or because we see what we want to see. I'll give you a specific example. You might have heard of the SPM, the Madani Medical Scheme, that subsidizes outpatient care for poorer people. It was first piloted last year in June. It was upscaled in September, and then downscaled again just to 10 districts just last month. But I ask you, what was the impact evaluation behind these decisions? And was the impact evaluation, even if it was done, was it independent or was it communicated to the public? How can a Rakyat know whether upscaling was a good idea in the first place last year, or whether the subsequent downscaling was a good idea last week? To cite one telling statistic, one rough proxy of a country's impact evaluation culture is a number of registered RCTs, something called randomized controlled trials. Don't worry if you don't know what it means. It's just perfectly okay, but it's just one metric. Let me share with you some numbers. Indonesia has over 90 registered RCTs. Vietnam, about 40. You know how many Malaysia has? 0. So, by all means, fail, experiment, fail often, but fail fast, fail early, and fail forward. Learn from failure instead of failing to learn. Finally, and I'm going to conclude with this, the question of what is Malaysia's value proposition? Now, every economy has issues, and some of you may know that I'm not exactly shy in pointing them out here in the case of Malaysia. But I deeply believe that Malaysia has a value proposition that is unique. Currently, Malaysia has stable and low inflation, low unemployment, low foreign denominated debt. It has a strong base of semiconductor exports. It is beginning to reform subsidies and reviving investments. It can be a global leader in Islamic finance. It has a deep domestic investor base, and it is even well insulated from most disasters vis-a-vis the ring of fire countries such as Philippines or Indonesia. It has land and resources that, with the right agricultural policies in particular, can turn it into a contributor to regional and global food security. And all these fundamentals are now underpinned by a stable government, which hopefully has a clear 4-year runway, notwithstanding what Tunku Zain said. So reforms that amplify them can make Malaysia soar. That, to me, is Malaysia's value proposition, and that is also the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Apurva, for the keynote address. It has definitely set the tone for today's discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, kind reminder, on your table there are 2 QR codes. One will allow you to submit questions during our panel discussions, and the other QR code will take you to the event agenda, speakers' profiles, as well as IDS's social media accounts. Now, to start off our first panel discussion, I would like to invite to the stage the moderator, Ms. Aira Azhari, Senior Manager of Advocacy and Events at IDS Malaysia, together with the esteemed panelists, Dato' Dr. Johan Arifin Samad, Ibrahim Sufyan, and Oi Kok Hin. As I've stated, ladies and gentlemen, you can send over your questions by scanning the QR code on your tables. Aira, over to you.
Harrison. That will need a pep. You close the mic. Yes, and I'm not. Events a bit there.
Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this Wednesday morning for our Malaysia Outlook Conference. I'm pleased to see such a big turnout, and I believe we have our friends from the media as well. So thanks again for being here. My name is Aira Azhari. I'm the Senior Manager at IDS. I'll be the moderator for this session. I have my colleague Sally next to me who will help me with the questions from the floor, which I hope will be coming. You can scan the QR code on your tables, and please do submit your questions. It's a short panel, so we have about an hour. So what I will do is I will start with 2 rounds or 3 rounds of questions for our panelists, and I will then look out for your questions from the floor, yeah? Yes, so we have 3 panelists with us today. I believe they need no introduction, but the far left is Mr. Oi Kok Hin. He's the Executive Director of Bersih. And then Ibrahim Sufyan, or Ben Sufyan, as we call him, of Merdeka Center, and also Dato' Johan Arifin Samad, who is a member of G25, a writer, and also a former CEO of IDS Sabah. So welcome to all three. Ben, I think I will start with you. Yes, the microphone is just there. So I think I would like to start with the PM's approval ratings now post Najib's partial pardon. And also, if you can give some insight into the dynamics between the parties in the unity government currently. Has that affected that dynamic, and how do you see that playing out in the year? Go ahead.
Thank you, Aira. Thank you, everyone, for spending your Wednesday morning here, listening to this panel about unending saga of Malaysian politics. Thank you so much, Adias, for having me on. I think the first question regarding Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's ratings. We have tracked this individual for many, many years, for nearly 20 years now. And I think Dato' Sri Anwar has, certainly a very colorful career in politics, in and out of jail, and then now at the topmost position of the public office. And I think throughout this entire period, he has always had a core band of supporters, and I think that accounts for, at the very least, about 30 or about 1/3 of the Malaysian electorate generally support him through thick and thin. And that has been able to allow his coalition to pull through elections even during the toughest times. Now, before he became Prime Minister, I think Dato' Sri Anwar's ratings were pretty low, so just down to the core, largely because he failed to become Prime Minister after 2020 and so on. And so there is in the Malaysian electorate, a segment of people that will pretty much go with the bandwagon. So we estimate that to be around 15 to 20%. So they will swing one way or another. After he became Prime Minister, his approval rating shot up to 65%. So this was in December 2022. And what it meant was it carried along a high degree of expectation from the Malaysian public to undertake reforms and carry out the things that he had set out to do. Now, more than a year on, and in the wake of the reduction of former PM Najib Razak's sentence and the discount on the fine that has been the subject of numerous social media memes and discussion, it's inevitable that I think there will be a decline. We have just concluded a survey. I was just looking at the results this morning. There is about a 3% drop in the approval rating for the Prime Minister. So he was doing about 50% in January, and I think so there's about 2 to 3% decline in the approval rating somewhat. So there is a cost to pay for events that are not completely in his control. And I think for the current year, that's one major event. Another major event that we probably will see unfold is when the government decides to undertake subsidy cuts, particularly for fuel, diesel, and subsequently the RON 95 petrol. To the second question on the relationship between the coalition parties, I think first and foremost, the main coalition parties, Pakatan Harapan and Barisan Nasional relationship. From what we gather, discussions with leaders, feedback from people within the two coalitions, generally relationships quite good, pretty coordinated between the top leaders of the party. They hold frequent meetings at the top. And so there are no major crises of confidence or trust issues at the very top level. Where I think there are challenges, and I'm not saying this is completely a bad thing, but this is comes with the territory of coalition formation and coalition cooperation, is at the grassroots and mid-level leadership. I think before we go there, just to give a comment, I think there is a realization on both main coalitions that they cannot do without the other. One group has ginormous support, super majority support among the non-Muslim population. Another group has every support within the Muslim population that allows them to kind of hold together and capture perhaps about 40% of the Malay Muslim vote. The problem is that the challenges are within at the working level, at the grassroots. And we've seen in the state elections last year in August, not every UMNO or Barisan Nasional supporter turned out to support Pakatan Harapan candidate. So this so-called vote transferability at that point in time stood at about 40-45%. If they are able to improve, and I think the recommendations that I was given to them was they need to strengthen their cooperation at the local level, joint committees, and also predetermine the seats that they want to contest in future elections together, then I think the vote transferability will improve, and that will strengthen the ability of the present coalition to stay in power, perhaps into the next term, if everything works out in their favor.
Thank you, Ben. Interesting insights which will on, I think, in a bit. But for now, I would like to go to Kok Hin. Just now, Ben also kind of mentioned this a bit, is the relationship between parties in PH. So I would like you to elaborate a bit. What do you think is the future of Pakatan Harapan moving forward? Is there a future for truly multiracial politics? And does the concept actually have deeply rooted support in Malaysia? So that's 3 questions in one. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Aira, and thank you, Ideas, for the invitation and to the crowd for attending. So to Aira's question about multiracial politics, whether it has a future and so on, it depends on what kind of multiracial politics are we talking about here. If you are talking about some form of cooperation among ethnic parties, that's been around since independence. In political science, we call it consociationalism. So you have the elites from each ethnic group basically bargain among themselves and negotiate for, political stabilities and government and so on. So that has always been ongoing. Thus, Pakatan Harapan since 2018 and until now offers a departure from that model. I think that remains to be seen. I think the democratic transition in Malaysia since 2018 is still too early to tell. I think some scholars still debate about the legacy of the Weimar Republic in Germany, let alone in Malaysia, just 6 years away from quite a breakthrough elections that we had in May 2018. I do want to mention about 2 distinguishing factors that I think are quite unprecedented for our ethnic politics in Malaysia since 2018, or especially in today. The first being that today, Malaysia has, for the first time ever, we have a prime minister that comes from a political party that is not an ethnic party. By that I mean ethnic party, a party that claims to represent exclusively one ethnic group and so on. So it's the first time that Malaysia has a prime minister who is the leader of a political party that is multiracial. Now, second factor is this is the first time at the federal level, the first post-election coalition government, which means they do not campaign together before the elections. They do not even arrange like, I do not contest against you and so on, which is what Pakatan Rakyat was in 2008. Before there even exists a Pakatan Rakyat entity, the parties basically agreed that we will not contest against each other. So in this case, UMNO actually contest against PH and so on. So this is really the first time that we have a post-election coalition government at the federal level. Now, what does these 2 factors mean for Malaysia? I think this opens up the risk of the repeat of what might happen in 2020, where you have quite a multiracial government, an incumbent, and you're being flanked on the right in terms of the ethnic competition, because the opposition now is quite mono-ethnic in terms of racial and religious positions. So what would this government need to do to prevent a repeat of February 2020 in the form of Sheraton move? I think there are 3 impending risks for political stability. I like that Apuva just now mentioned the difference between political stability and policy stability. In terms of, for per se, we see there are 3 risks to political stability at this juncture. The first being if you follow the development closely over the past week, Bersatu amended the party constitution to deal with 5-6 lawmakers that have pledged support for the Prime Minister. So this is basically to circumvent the anti-hopping law and they are trying to trigger a by-elections if they succeed to do so. So they have amended the party constitution and they have given it to the Registrar of Society for approval. Now, if Registrar of Society, which doesn't always have the fairest reputation of being fair, that's why President Ideas are registered as Senior Berhad. The ROS, if they approve, this may or may not, depending on whatever legal challenge that may come up, this may or may not trigger 6 by-elections. And these 6 Bersatu MPs are probably going up against UMNO candidates. And if, in the event of UMNO losing all 6 by-elections, are we going to see a repeat of Tanjung Piai by-election, whereby Bersatu lost badly and they had to reconsider their political future? And they decided, or rather Tan Sri Muhyiddin decided that our future no longer belongs with Pakatan Harapan, therefore we pull out and form a new bloc. So that is the first risk that I think for Pakatan Harapan or Dato' Sri Anwar in general. The second risk, I would say, is the Sabah state election, which must happen by, I believe, December 2025. But there have been some rumors saying that it may happen late this year. I think you may have seen some news about the political arguments between the blocs and so on. So there is a possibility that it may happen, and what happened in Sabah may also affect the political alignment at the national level. The third risk is basically UMNO. UMNO, I think, as Ben has pointed out, in terms of the ethnic alignment and so on. So UMNO is basically in the position that Bersatu was for Pakatan Harapan government in 2018-2020. So it really boils down to whether UMNO is going to stay with this coalition, or which part of UMNO will stay with this coalition. And the party elections that may happen in 2026, I think that may affect whether this government will go into the G16 as one bloc or they're going to depart before that. So I think I will stop here and we can elaborate more on that later.
Thank you, Kok Hin. Yeah, definitely some points that we can come back to. But now I think I want to get Dato' Johan to share his thoughts a bit. So my first question for you is, I think you recently just launched your new book, right? Called Unequal Partners.
Correct,
I think it would be good if you share actually some of the concerns that you raised in your book. Yeah, thank you, Dato'. Over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Good morning to everybody present here, and thank you, Tricia, for inviting a lone ranger from East Malaysia to give a voice in such a forum as this. Most of the time, we don't get invited at all, so I'm very grateful that you gave the opportunity to talk. Yes, I just launched my book, and it's been nominated as one of the best nonfiction for 220. So if you go on the Star page, please vote for me. And my book is available at the back. I need this plug, Tricia, so I just mentioned my book a bit. Yes, the book is all about my collection from 2017 about Malaysia as a whole. I've been an opinion writer in many news portals, and people know by my pen name, Joe Samad, and I write as Joe Samad. And but my real name is Johan Arifin. My identity is to protect myself in case I get shot by a lot of people who disagree with my voice. But anyway, it's about my concern about where Malaysia is heading. And our narrative today, if we wake up every morning, is race, religion. People say 3R, the king, but it's not correct because we don't have the king in Sabah and Sarawak. So we're not so worried about that. But race and religion is a big issue. And that dominates our politics. So where I come from, we don't have this issue at all. In that sense, that is the headline news So it's very concerning for us because it's dragging down the whole of Malaysia, which includes Sabah and Sarawak. So I think the narrative has to change. And I've written my book about the geopolitics of the region of Borneo, how Borneo is actually distancing itself from the central government, the Peninsular Malaysia, because of this, and gravitating towards the Borneo Island itself. And we can see that Indonesia is moving the capital to Borneo, and that's will be a new catalyst for us in terms of economic growth and relationship and networking. All right, and if this narrative in Peninsular Malaysia about race and religion continues, then I think at the end of the day, we'll see more distancing happening between Borneo states and Peninsular Malaysia. So I raised this concern in my book, Race, Religion, and how it's damaging to Malaysia and Borneo. So in today's context, I would like to say that politically, we are controlling Peninsular Malaysia politics in the sense that the combined 56 seats that we have between GPS and the coalition in Sabah can make or break the government, all right? So, but we are very diplomatic people, and we don't want to see that happen because we don't want any more instability in Malaysia, because we look forward for economic growth and development. And what is happening is that we're exerting more of our autonomy through the Malaysia Agreement 1963. Many of you in this room are still not aware that we did not give birth to Malaysia through Merdeka 1957. It was September 16 Malaysia Agreement that we signed together, Singapore, Sabah, Sarawak, and Malaya, that gave birth to Malaysia. So in our view, we always look at it from the Malaysia Agreement point of view, and not so much from the Merdeka point of view. I was here in September 16 last year, and when I drove the street, it was so quiet compared to Merdeka Day celebration. Yeah? So there is not much significance given to Malaysia Day and Malaysia prominence. Now, in terms of autonomy, we are exerting it for various reasons. One of the main reasons is development funds, which is lacking. Anwar Ibrahim has promises many things, but has not delivered. For example, the 300 million additional grants that they promised us has not been given. And then only last year he mentioned that projects below 50 million will be given to Sabah State and Sarawak State to decide. And for us, we are subcontractors. For example, JKR, okay, we have no control over development projects or managing the development projects. It's all decided in KL. Anwar Ibrahim realizes it, so he says, okay, all right, you guys, I trust you 50 million and below, and you can decide for yourself. That's really an insult to us. The BN insulted us further before by calling us a fixed deposit, right? And they lost the fixed deposit. And so now we are being controlled again by central government, and this is where we find it very irritating and causes a lot of bad relations with it. And the big issue today is the 40% revenue sharing of tax, which is in the news. Sabah Law Association has taken the initiative to go to court to decide, to get the court to decide on the 40% revenue sharing, which is quite substantial. And if you backdate it, if you're allowed to backdate it, it will run to billions. So these are the issues that we have to be aware of, not just issues in KL, but issues in Borneo, which is going to affect Peninsular Malaysia also. So there's another group that has taken the federal government to court on the continental shelf issue, where we say that all the oil resources in Sabah Sarawak belongs to Borneo. We don't mind sharing it with federal government, but be fair to us, because, for example, Petronas gives the 50 billion dividend to the federal government, say, on average every year, but we only get 5 billion, okay, 5% of the oil royalty. But we're the major producing state. So, Purva, sorry if I mispronounced your name, but you mentioned about restrictions just now. Restriction is not only one way, it's two ways, okay? So you mentioned about the law is not allowed to practice in Sabah and Sarawak. There are very good reasons for that. And for your information, only this year or last year, we were given a board seat on the EPF, income tax, and Petronas. So we've been contributing to the federal government for 60 years, but we have not been given this position. So we find that also restrictive. It's not one-way traffic. And so these are things that which a lot of you don't know how we feel. But bottom line, if I can conclude for the moment, that we are pushing for more autonomy. You can see that a lot coming from Sarawak, and Sabah is also working closely on that matter, also including education and health. We want to take that back also, because we're not interested in just talking in Malay, but we also think English is very important going forward to become industrialized nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato' Johan. I will definitely need to get back to you on some points. And I see that there are already a lot of questions coming. I will take one more round, actually, of questions from me to the panelists before we go into the Q&A session. But keep them coming, yeah? Ben, I would like to go back to you. Kok Hin touched a bit also on opposition dynamics, right? So we know that we have formidable opposition, to say the least, at the moment. But I would like to pick your brains a bit on, and I've, in my conversations with friends also, why has PAS been actually quite largely silent on Najib's partial pardon issue? And also, if you can share on your thoughts on the future of the PAS and Bersatu relationship, especially with this new ROS issue coming up, the amendment to their party constitution coming up, and also the allegations of the Prime Minister buying support from the Bersatu MPs.
I think, testing, okay. I think with respect to the opposition right now, why they seem to be quiet in response to the Najib Razak sentence reduction, I think in part is because there's two narratives that's being thrown out there. Number one, that it could be construed as intervention by the government, undue intervention that caused for the sentence to be reduced. The other narrative is that it's at the behest or at the discretion of the king. And so I think for them to work on that issue and try to mobilize public support around it, I think it's a strategy that's delivering diminishing returns. I think the challenge for the opposition parties, PAS and Bersatu, or collectively Perikatan Nasional, is that how do they gain more non-Malay support ahead of the next general election? Because in terms of Malay-Muslim support, they've pretty much maxed out. They've reached about 60-65% Malay support. The only room to grow in terms of Malay support and therefore try and win a little bit more seats is with the first-time voters. So there will be, a small increase in the number of voters going into the 2026-2027 election cycle, but it's really marginal. That's one. Number two, I think, so they're pretty confident about holding on to their Malay base. And whether with or without Bersatu, going to your third question, they believe that the numbers are pretty much there in their favor. So if Bersatu somehow slows down or the enthusiasm peters out, because Bersatu is pretty much centered around the personality of former Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin, then I think PAS is poised to take over the supporters who are there. That's one point. The second point is that in terms of them to grow additional Malay support, they are, I think, hitting that brick wall, because whatever Malay support that remains, are already in the entrenched camp of supporters of Pakatan Harapan, about 15%, 12% maximum, and Barisan Nasional about 30% or Malay support there. So that's not going to go very far. So I think they have to go for non-Malay support, and that's I think where things are they're searching for an answer there. So we expect to see that in the coming years, there will be, I think, stronger attempts on the part of Perikatan Nasional to boost its standing, its credibility with non-Malay voters. And that's, I think, a tough call, partly because the level of trust non-Malay voters have towards Perikatan Nasional, and specifically PAS, is very, very low on account of their strong Islamist credentials, which, on the other hand, strengthens their hand among Malays. So that's where it is. So with respect to the change in support or defections within Bersatu MPs who've shifted support to the Prime Minister, in my view, that doesn't change things on the ground. It's just the individual parliamentarians that have shifted support in return for maybe development funds for the constituencies. That's just within Parliament and maybe give some numbers there. But it doesn't change the situation in the seats where these MPs come from. So if by-elections are held, and things remain pretty much the same as it did in August 2023, then I think we are going to see pretty much similar outcomes again as what we saw. In 2023, August state elections, we found that nearly 2/3 Malay voters supported Perikatan Nasional, and so that's the writing on the wall. So unless the macro dynamics change with respect to government services delivery, economic performance, but I think more critically is that emotive connection between those in power and those people who are voting changes, i.e. resulting in greater trust towards government moving forward, then I think we are going to see somewhat similar results. So whether or not Barisan Nasional is going to stay in the coalition or not, I think depends for something that happens in the future. There may be a party leadership change in 2026 after the party elections. There may not be, we're not sure. But I think the key question confronting Barisan Nasional leaders into the future is whether or not they think that the party has been rehabilitated enough to win support from the public. And I think that still, it's not there yet. So I think that's pretty much it, Aira.
Thank you, Ben. Interesting points, especially on the future of Barisan Nasional. Kok Hin, I would like you, and one of the key work areas I know for Bersih right now is on the delineation exercise, right? So maybe you can explain a bit about the concept and the timeline of the upcoming delineation exercise and how that affects our politics and also racial and religious issues in Malaysia.
Okay, so maybe before I start, like how many people in this room knows of delineation? Like, do you know what delineation is, and do you know how the process is done? Can you raise your hand? Okay. Belum 2/3 majority, so I have to explain. So delineation is the redrawing of electoral boundaries. So Malaysia practice a first past the post electoral system. So you vote for an MP or ADO who represent the area. It's not like proportional representation where the whole country can be one constituency or one seat, then you divide according to the vote share. So in Malaysia, we have had delineation for, since we started independence and so on. And the last delineation was done around 2015, 2016, just in time for the luluskan sebelum GE14. So constitutionally, the process, you can only commence the process 8 years apart from the last one. It doesn't have to be done within 8 years, but you can start the process after 8 years. So if currently the Prime Minister doesn't want to trigger the button on delineation, he can. But he may start the process if he wants, SPR, PM, and so on. Now, why delineation is an important thing, or perhaps, I would say it's the specter of delineation coming up perhaps in the next couple of years, other than the specter of Najib, which he can still appeal, he has another case and so on. The specter of delineation is basically such that any redrawing of electoral boundary is going to be contentious. as you can imagine now with the political rhetoric getting quite heated, and I would say there still remains quite a lot of animosity between the parliamentary opposition and the government, especially between the Prime Minister and the opposition leader. They are not sitting down negotiating. It was not like what it was under Ismail Sabri. Delineation in Malaysia, we face two big problems, which is malapportionment and gerrymandering. Malapportionment is purely in terms of size. So, for example, in Sabah Bernam, voters about 50,000, and you have, in the same state, you have like Bangi, which is like 5-6 times the amount of voters there. So clearly, even in the same state, we are not comparing cases like Kappa and Putrajaya, which people use all the time. But constitutionally, the one yang ada legal basis to argue against is kawasan in the same state having disproportionate difference in size. No, that's wrong constitutionally. The other problem is gerrymandering, which is the manipulation of boundary drawn in a very weird way, cutting off local communities just to benefit certain partisan interests. I think what happened with automatic voter registration, AVR, and Undi 18 has worsened the status quo. Now you have a lot of young people in urban areas, suburban areas, and these have been transformed into first-time voters in G15. Malapportionment has not been fixed since before implementation of AVR and Undi 18. So now the problem has gotten worse, and it needs to be addressed because your vote value is so big in difference that is unfair. It violates the principle of one person, one vote, one value. Now, the Prime Minister, Bersih met with the Prime Minister last week after our so-called demonstrasi manja outside of Parliament last week. So we met him and we presented him a list of 10 reforms, one of which we in political financing, which ideas have been championing for a long time. And the other thing which we talk about with him is the appointment of EC chair, who is bound to retire in 2 months' time, and also delineation. Now, there has been some, shall I say, rumors in the corridors of power that say the Prime Minister's camp is hesitant to tackle this topic because they are afraid that it might be ISET 2.0. For those who are familiar, when Malaysia tried to rectify the ISET, back when the first Pakatan Harapan government, there was a huge backlash. The conservative basically unite and mobilize in the streets of KL and so on. So he felt that it might give them the pretext to mobilize and unite. Now, Bersih's recommendation is that the Prime Minister should involve parliamentary vetting of the next SPR chair so that the next person who become the Election Commission chief will not be accused of being so-called nominated by the PM and his guy, basically. Because this next EC chief is the one that will oversee and implement the next delineation exercise. So he has to buy insurance, the Prime Minister, let bipartisan fingerprint in this appointment process, and not expose himself to political accusation that it will be withdrawn according to his political interests. So that's Bersih's position. Let's make this a bipartisan process. Let's get it done, but be done in a transparent and bipartisan way so that it doesn't become a political liability or triggering massive ethnic outcry and so on. So I think, that needs to be seen whether he will implement it or not.
Thank you, Kohin. Thanks for the delineation 101 that you gave us. Okay, Dato' Johan, my next question for you, actually I wanted to go into, so in your book and also in your columns, you often write about the unequal development, right, in between Semenanjung and also East Malaysia. I wanted to get your thoughts on how much is governance within the state of Sabah itself also plays a role in the problems facing Sabah when it comes to development, as you mentioned just now.
Yeah, I get this question all the time about governance in Sabah and Sarawak. Actually, governance is everywhere. It's not only Sabah and Sarawak. The issue of governance is not just Sabah and Sarawak. It's also in Peninsular Malaysia. But just giving you example just now, about JKR, about 50 million rights to award contract without the approval of the federal government, or the federal government has delegated that right to Sabah and Sarawak. A lot of people don't know that the federal agencies in Sabah also operate there in a parallel with the state government departments. And I mentioned just now, you have federal JKR, then you have Sabah JKR, and all the major contracts are decided here. The budget, which contractors are to be given, and so on. So what we get is JKR managing as a subcontractor. So they get maybe a management fee of about 4%, and they oversee the project, that's all. But everything is decided in KL. So if you talk about governance, I think you have to talk about in totality, okay? Because as I said, every project is controlled by the federal government. So if you want to talk about governance alone in Sabah, I think it's quite unfair that if there's any issues about governance, it's solely blame on these Malaysians. So I think the federal government, which controls all the projects in Sabah under 12 Malaysia plan and so on, equally responsible in this issue. But not taking away anything. I think I've written my book also, and I acknowledge the politics of Sabah and Sarawak and how destructive it is also, especially for Sabah. James Chin presented something in one of our symposium last year. For Sabah, we have 16 chief ministers since Malaysia was formed, as compared to 6 in Sarawak. And why we have 16? Well, part of the blame also is the federal government and Mahathir, who during the rotation system, we the only state in Malaysia that had to undergo and endure this Mahathir nonsense, where we have a chief minister rotation of 2 years, 2 years, and which is not even in the constitution, and it's not in our law, but we are imposed on this rotation system. So the other issue we have to bring forward is that the Sabah and Sarawak is asking for 1/3 parliamentary seats, which I think everybody here have to understand. Our premise is that when Singapore left us, the 15 seats was divided back into Peninsula Malaysia instead of a big share between Sabah and Sarawak. So the government has agreed in principle, but how are we going to carry out the delineation process and so on is a bit tricky, because normally seats are associated with the number of population, and Sabah and Sarawak has, as you know, probably total about 5 to 6 million population as compared to many of the areas in Peninsula Malaysia. So this is something that we need to be aware of also. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato'. Great points. We only have about 20 more minutes for the panel, so I'm going to go into the Q&A session now. If we can, we will display the question on the big screen, but I'll just go into it now. So Ben, the first question is actually for you. So earlier you mentioned that the Prime Minister lost 3 percentage points post the Najib's pardon, half pardon. The person who asked this question is curious which demographic that this loss came from, i.e. ethnicity and geographic location. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I think it came about from the younger population. So not so much the older. So when I say younger, people below 30 years old, 18 to 30. Also some decline from within the non-Muslim base, within the Muslim base of supporters that has been unchanged since the previous month. So does it have any serious weight to it? I think for the time being, I think people cannot accept. And I think when we did the survey, it was also right during the time when the issue came about, and it's also before Shafi Abdullah showed that the pardons board actually ruled out against giving a pardon. So I think this is a discourse that's going to play out for the coming weeks and perhaps months. So I think it's happening from the core supporters of Pakatan Harapan who are displaying a bit of dissatisfaction with the outcomes there. And also within some segments of the Indian community, and that's building up over the last year or so on a number of different issues, but it's now also included this sentence reduction and fine discount on Najib Razak's case. But if you ask me, we look at this number, we look also in terms of party support numbers haven't changed, so that pretty much remains intact. So yes, there is a loss of approval, but it hasn't quite translated to votes yet.
Thank you, Ben. Second question, I would like to get Kok Hin's thought on this actually. So there's a question on how do you see the present conflict between more conservative forces against more liberal push playing out? Will it have some impact on social and economic policies? So maybe you can just lend some thoughts, especially post this Nick Yilin case, and as we know, the polemics that play out daily in Parliament. I think there was this Bakute issue raised recently. So some of your thoughts on that, Kok Hin.
Okay, I would like to contextualize my response to what Ben was saying earlier about PN has basically realized that they have almost saturated their Malay support, and therefore they are trying to, appeal to non-Malay or non-Muslim votes. Especially PAS, I think they are much more driven about this. So with that in mind, I think they have not really manufactured outrage as 100% as they could, I think, because they are also mindful of their public image now. In terms of whether this divide between liberal and conservative and whether it will affect social economic policies, at the moment, I don't think so. I think any argument that's saying that the Prime Minister and this government is progressive, liberal, secular, sesat semua ni, I think it's flat out. Either someone is in denial or they know what they are saying. They are just spinning it out of partisan interest. Now, why do I say that? Not speaking as Bersih, speaking as myself, nanti media code pula, salah. The DAP today, the so-called boogeyman of liberal, secular apa semua, the DAP today is at its most conservative form ever. If you compare the statements from Lim Kit Siang in the 60s, 70s, even up until 90s, and you compare to today, it's such a big difference. The DAP is not making a radical stance to change anything major, departure from the past, let alone anything about quota, right? So there's no big departure in terms of, for some of us, we will say as a disappointment because there is no big policy change compared to the past. Apuva here would probably sell it as policy stability. So it depends which spins you would like to put to it. But let me just say this. I think the Prime Minister needs to be aware of the expectations, the voter expectations for this Reformasi government. Reformasi is not something that started in November 2022. It has been 26 years of people mobilizing, people losing their job, going out to the streets to fight for this chance to make a difference. Now, the Madani government can say that we implement this institutional reform in terms of tata kelola and everything administratively. But don't forget, under Prime Minister Najib, we have ETP, we have GTP, we have all these government transformation program as well. So when the Prime Minister Anwar do this, it is not a big difference. It is not a legacy thing. Now, he has been talking reformasi for 26 years. We are expecting major policy change that will last institutionally, that will last beyond his administration. So where are these reforms? I say we are waiting, perhaps not so patiently anymore. We will organize and pressure when necessary, but we are also ready to cooperate if he wants to implement these reforms. I'm sure Ideas, Bersih, everyone is more than happy to cooperate in its implementation, but he needs to start pushing out all these reforms starting from now.
Thank you, Kohin. So my next question is actually got the highest votes, so I'll need to ask this question. So it's a question to any panelists here, but maybe I'll give the first right to answer to Dato' Johan since you haven't answered the question yet. How would the death of Tun Taib Mahmud affect the politics of Sarawak specifically or Malaysia generally? Are you okay to take that first?
Can you repeat again?
How would the death of the late Taib Mahmud affect the politics of Sarawak specifically or Malaysia generally?
That's a very difficult question to answer, actually. I think James Chin, if you read his interview or heard this interview on BMF, I think has already explained the legacy of Taib Mahmud. I think all I like to say is that that's the last of the Mohicans in terms of the strong leaders like Tun Mustafa and so on. So it will have an impact on Sabah and Sarawak outlook, political, economic, and so on. But Sabah and Sarawak, I think, are in good hands now and progressing well. Especially Sarawak, I think World Bank has given them what you call label as being a high-income state, not nation state, and it's quite strange because you would look at a nation as a high income, but not a state. So we are very proud of Sarawak also, and Sabah hopes to emulate them. And down the road, if you can get rid of all the yoke of federal government around our neck in terms of the past UMNO and the politics of Sabah being influenced by federal, we'll be on the same road as Sarawak, I think, which is much more stable, and they have closed the door to UMNO and other destructive parties coming to our shores.
Ben or Kohin, would you like to take a stab at how?
Take a stab at it. I think the interesting remark about the interesting observation about the death of the former governor is, in the wake of it and the tussle, the ongoing tussle over the inheritance, and there's a ginormous amount of discussion on social media about the assets that the late person has accumulated during his lifetime. How did that come about on his chief minister and government salary? Thousands and thousands of hectares of land and so on. So I think for me, for me, it also shows the limits of coalition politics, that if you need the support of the party or the leader, then you also then need to look the other way in terms of indiscretions or some of the irregularities that has happened there. I think that has happened in the past, that's continuing to happen in the future. So I'm all for the upholding of the MA 63 spirit agreement in action and in spirit, but also autonomy comes with accountability. It has to be come hand in hand. So right now we see a lot of development projects that are taking place in the state of Sarawak. One wonders whether they are all carried out properly with good governance structures in place. And so we will see, time will unfold and tell us, how these things really take place. Because we've seen so many irregularities, come and go in Malaysia, and I think some economists must have already done the numbers, how many % of public spending actually gets wasted or ends up in foreign offshore accounts. So I think that's key. So beyond state nationalism and so on, there's also a question of how much of the state's resources, small or minuscule percentage as it is, actually goes back to the people of Sabah and Sarawak. I think that's the question. And number two, are the people in the state free enough, able to call their leaders to account over their conduct while in government, both in Sabah and in Sarawak? Because we see the voting pattern in Sabah, it's more fragmented. I think Sabah has more democracy going on. A lot of parties are contesting there, but in Sarawak we can see that the voting pattern is very skewed towards one single party. So we'll see how it goes in terms of the future. But I think, yeah, so his legacy would be, calling to account in terms of conduct while in power and beyond.
Thank you, Ben. Kok Hin, would you like to answer that? Go ahead.
I would like to tackle it from a different angle. I would say two things. Historical amnesia, and I'm worried about the state of democracy in Sarawak. And this is perhaps why I think we need decentralization of politics. I think because of what happened at the national level, so the state opposition in Sarawak also toed the line and basically sing praises. And now I'm completely aware of the political correctness of not saying something ugly when someone passed away. But you can choose to remain silent. You don't have to put out a public performance of adulation and so on. Given that, I don't know about some of you, but some of us in this hall is old enough to remember what some opposition was saying about the late Taib Mahmud when he was in power. This rewriting of history, I think, is something concerning, and I'm worried about the state of democracy / opposition in Sarawak. Who are the opposition? Now everyone is trying to win the support of the appealing to GPS, partly because they are worried that if they offend the GPS, that might trigger some change of power at the federal level. So perhaps this is why we need actually local-centric political competition and not everything centralized and aligned with the federal level. Now in Germany, this happens all the time, right? Parties could be coalition allies at the federal level and be competitors at the subnational level. And I think this, especially in Sabah Sarawak, maybe this could start there as well, the decentralization of our politics.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another interesting question. It says here for Bersih, but I'm not going to just direct this question to Kok Hin because it's an important question on balancing the current political rhetorics played by PN and how to balance that and ensuring the delivery of reform. Would doing everything without proper advocacy for the people be important? So Kok Hin, earlier you mentioned about ICERT. So this person said that, the whole ICERT fiasco is what happens if you just push for reform blindly. So your thoughts on how to balance this? Maybe Kok Hin first, and then I would like to hear as well from Ben and Datuk Johan.
Yeah, so Bersih being a social movement, there's this idea of collective ownership of what Bersih do and so on. So everybody has an opinion, right? I think when we do the demonstration outside Parliament, we got supported but also slammed by all sorts of sides. Some would say, for example, this comment here, right? If you push too hard, you are triggering opposition to this government, which is, quote unquote, the most pro-reform there is. And what is the alternative if this government falls? You will have an even more conservative government and you don't get what you want anyway, right? So that's one line. Don't make noise. So are we supposed to just sit and watch Madani? Like, are we supposed to just clap and sit down and know our role and shut our mouth kind of thing? I think civil society has to walk a fine balance between not doing something recklessly, but also standing up when you need to. And I think when you organize, when you stand up and you organize and build public pressure, it actually gives leverage to those people in government who is pro-reform, but they can't speak up because they have positions now. And this is some of the feedback that we got as well, that they actually support people who are pro-reform, but they themselves can't make a public stance. So they are relying on people like us to mobilize and organize for support. Now, I think this is also goes to the flip side of this, which is people who are very pro-principle dan sebagainya lah. So these are the people who say that, Bersih and others should be more garang, it should be more loud and vocal and everything. But I think the times have changed. This is not like 2013 or even 1999, right? It's not Abu anymore. It's not Asal bukan UMNO. You have a kiblat, everything is pointed towards there. It's no longer the case. I think civil society has become more sophisticated now. We know when to lobby, work closely behind closed door. We also know when to build for public action and build pressure. And to be clear, Bersih, just yesterday, 2 days ago, we gave memorandums to leaders of all political parties. We have met with 3 party presidents from PH, BN, dan BN. So bersih and ideas, no problem. Sitting down with whichever party, as long as they are serious and have the intention to enact the reforms that we all have common interest in.
Thank you. Either Datuk Johan or Ben, would you like to add? Datuk, go ahead.
I'm aware a little bit about what's going on lately with Bresse. I've spoken to some of the senior Bresse or ex-Bresse people. I think Bresse, from what I hear, is at the crossroads. Whether you want to go back to the streets and demonstrate, or you want to have something like the confidence supply arrangement, which seems to be working during Sabri Yaakoob's time. Well, it's not for me to say, but I'm just saying that are we going on the streets again to demonstrate and pressure the government, or are we going to sit down and be part of the government to change from the inside? But I think for me, both are equally important to demonstrate your physical presence as well as confidence supply arrangement. But then it's a fine thread to walk on. So I leave that to Mr. Oye and his gang to move forward. But for us, we always supported Bresse move. I was part of it. We were all, my wife's dears, we all wore yellow shirts and demonstrated. And I think I'm a bit older now. I don't think I want to do that. But I'm more towards on the table discussion, reform, as long as the current government is open to that. Okay. So I mean, there's still doubts about freedom of speech. And you know, being liberal about what we can say and all that. And what I worry today is the Islamic religion overpowering us in terms of giving leeway in terms of speaking out. For example, why Jakim is given 1 billion, and then when we speak out about that, you know, we are criticized, and it's difficult for us, especially being Muslims, to answer all those things. Okay, so I think that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dato. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So what I'll do is I will let each of our speaker, maybe you want to address 1 or 2 more points, and then just your concluding sentence. So we'll start with Ben, and then Kok Hin, and then we'll close with Dato' Johan. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Aira. I think I just wanted to say that I think with things moving forward, the government has got its job clear cut, you know, for the medium term, because we are only about maybe 2 to 3 years before the next general election. Numerically speaking, or in terms of electoral numbers, the government's position is pretty stable, so long as it remains in this coalition. It's up for UMNO or Barisan Nasional to decide whether it wants to be part of a coalition or not. But I think unless there's drastic change in the makeup or the leadership of the party, their best way forward probably is to remain in a coalition. So with that situation put away, then I think what the government has to do with respect to reforms is that it has to start from its own house. It has to convince members of the bureaucracy about the value and why these reforms need to take place. There has to be a sense of national vision of what's in the best interest of the country. Because if you look at voting patterns are important because it actually shows the choices people make. You can see how civil servants, teachers, military and security personnel voted. Overwhelming numbers voted for PAS and Bersatu in the last election. Maybe over many, many reasons, but I think first and foremost is the belief that the country should remain in the hands of parties that advance the Malay agenda. Now the question that the federal government needs to consider is whether advancing the Malay agenda alone, in exclusion of anything else, serves the national interest as well. And I think they have to sort that out moving into the future before they can get the rest of the things moving.
Thank you, Ben. Kok Hin, just your short closing remark.
Yeah, 2 points which dovetails with what Dato' Joe and Ben is saying. Ben was saying that election, we only have 3-4 years left before the election, but I would say it's shorter. It's probably 2 years. Why? Nothing much will get done in the year 2027. Everyone will be entering election mode. So nothing too politically risky, no major policy change. 26, as you mentioned earlier, there may be a party election in UMNO. So again, they might be status quo. So you are really just looking at this year and next year as the window of opportunity to push for reform. So if if Madani doesn't get anything done in these next 2 years, I would say status quo lah, this government. Everything will be status quo. Nothing much will get done. So this is our window of opportunity, and we have to act and make sure they deliver before they become even more conservative when they enters election mode. About the point Dr. Joe was saying, about Bersin and so on, and I think that echoes to the comment earlier, right? I think I'll conclude with this point, which is basically whether it's Madani, whether it's Anwar, or whether it's civil society like Bersin ideas. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to get things done, or do you want to be popular? I think if you want to be popular, okay, you might appeal to sentiment, so on and so forth. You will just swing according to the wind of the day, maybe follow some public service, whichever action is more popular. But if you want to get things done, there are times when you have to shut your mouth and negotiate behind closed door, lobbying each party for political support to pass anti-hopping law, to pass a law on constituency development, and so on. But there are also times when these are not getting anywhere, then we have to organize and build public pressure so that things actually get implemented.
Thank you, Dato' Johan. Short, yeah.
Batteries run out. In my concluding remarks, I'd just like to say, what is the value proposition of Malaysia? Mr. Apova, sorry, you mentioned about value proposition, and one of the key factors are land. Well, Borneo has probably 2/3 of the land area of Malaysia, and I think the Peninsula Malaysian has to look more towards the east. Okay, and in the Bible it says the Messiah will come from the east. So maybe they know something better. So from the east, I would like to say that I like to think that the rescue will come from there in terms of racial harmony, community spirit, and all that. And sitting with these two gentlemen, I'm here, Malay, Chinese, Indian kind of talk, which is very very common. But that's Peninsula Malaysia. In Sabah Sarawak, we don't talk in those terms because we have 50 ethnic groups. I have to mention everybody in the room. All the names of this ethnic group to talk about. But here, simple Malay, Chinese, Indian. So I think we have to break this cycle in Malaysia. But everything is based on race and religion, and I think East Malaysia will show the way, and we're showing the way now. As I mentioned, the last Mohican is gone. We have a new generation of leaders. We are not proud of some of the past leaders, of course. Like you are, I'm sure, not proud of Mahathir today, but we're also not proud of some of our leaders. But we should go forward and build on a new Malaysia Madani policy of the concept of everybody is involved, everybody is equal, no religion is higher than the other, and we should appreciate each other more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato'. With that, can you everyone please join me in giving a round of applause for our 3 panelists. It was my honor to be the moderator today, and this marks the end of our first panel discussion. I will hand it over back to Shazwan, but we have a photo, right? Okay, so let's take a photo first. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Aira and the panelists.
Say that again. Fine, back. Yeah.
While we're waiting for them, ladies and gentlemen, kind reminder, do check out our game, the Pantau Dana Politik. You can access the game by scanning the QR code for event guide on your table, and from there, click the button for Pantau Dana Politik, play the game. All right, now I invite Tunku Zain, Dr. Trisha, His Excellency Wayne Robson, His Excellency Bien Ready to come to the front for a short photo session.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we proceed to the next session, we would like to invite all delegates to have some refreshments just outside the hall. Feel free to have them outside or have them in the hall as well. We will take a break now for 20 minutes, so please come back into the hall at about 11:10. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. Without further ado, I would like to invite the moderator for Panel 2, Economic Outlook, Dr. Trisha Yeo, CEO of Ideas, together with the panelists, Dr. Zuhair Rosli, Nicholas Kaur, and Julia Goh. Please take your seats on the stage. A gentle reminder for the audience, you can send over your questions by scanning the QR code on your tables. And now, Dr. Trisha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So much. Hi, thank you so much, Shazwan, and thank you for staying with us in our second panel. So as introduced, I'm Trisha Yeo, I'm CEO of Ideas, and I will be moderating this panel with our esteemed guests and panelists. So what I'm going to do is, we have a short 1-hour panel before our final one, which also will be very interesting, so please stay with us till the end. But this panel, I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists, tell you a little bit about them, and then, of course, what we are going to speak about. And I think we already had a really good opening with the keynote address from Apurva, who talked about where Malaysia stands in relation to the world. I think we can have an opportunity to unpack what our keynote address, what the speaker talked about from the perspectives of these 3 individuals. Very important where they come from. So this panel, we're talking about the economic outlook. And this government has emphasized heavily on focusing on the economy, has released a whole slate of different plans, policy documents over the last year or so of its administration. You know, where are we? Starting with the Madani framework, followed by the new industrial master plan, the national energy transition roadmap, and so on and so forth. But we know already from the keynote address that not only is Malaysia experiencing, of course, a plummeting ringgit, or I've seen some people call it shringgit, you know, it's part of the context of global slowdown, low growth, low investment, as we heard. So with me, we have 3 esteemed guests, panelists, friends of Ideas. On my left is Nicholas Kaur. He is the head of research at Khazanah Nasional Berhad. In the middle, we have Julia Goh, who is a senior economist in Malaysia, Senior Vice President, Global Economics and Market Research, UOB Malaysia. And last but not least, Dr. Zuhair Rosli, who is the Head of Research of DM Analytics Malaysia. So each of them representing very important sectors, one from Khazanah, of course, our national investment fund, second from the banking industry, and third, of course, as a consulting research company. I've actually given some broad questions to them to respond to, but of course, they will have their own ideas of where to take this forward. I think it follows quite nicely from the first panel on the political outlook. We've already heard a little bit about the fact that we only have 2 years, right? 2024 and 2025, if we are really going to see some reforms through. So some broad questions as they speak for their first intervention. I had asked them to think about what does the Madani economy framework look like for Malaysia? Where does Malaysia sit in terms of our competitiveness vis-a-vis the rest of the world? So what I'm going to do is we'll just follow the flow. So we'll start with Nick, Julia, and then Zuhair. And for Nicholas, he will be speaking on a subject that's very close to Idea's heart, but I'll let him talk about that. But broadly speaking, Malaysia's competitiveness, maybe reflecting on the keynote address, and the role of government in achieving this big, highfalutin idea of competitiveness. Can we get there? Each of them will be asked to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes each, followed by my questioning to them based on what they speak about, and then we will open it up to the floor. So, Nick, thank you for joining us today, representing Khazanah, and please, the floor is
representing
yours.
myself.
Representing yourself, not Khazanah today, okay.
The media is here to say myself.
Okay, all right, noted. So, Nick representing Nick. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Tricia and Ideas, for inviting me. It's very nice to be with all of you here. And so maybe I think the question we were asked first is actually just on competitiveness in Malaysia and what that might look like for 2024. And, you know, so I'm somebody who doesn't necessarily subscribe to some of these global rankings in the IMD World Competitiveness. I know there's all of those, which actually is a measure of things like doing business, which the World Bank has done for many years, and trying to see what red tape you can cut, which is important. But I think ultimately we should ask also, in terms of competitiveness at the cultural level, whether or not we are a society or we have the firms that will actually try and compete. And so I think the particular topic that I think Tricia asked me to speak about is on GLCs, which is something that Ideas and many others have commented. Maybe let me just start first by saying there are GLCs and there are GLCs. You know, we actually had a massive study done a few years ago, which tried to actually look at all the GLCs in the Malaysian landscape, and there are just so many, right? So the term GLC actually came from something that started in 2004 called the GLC Transformation Program, and which was something that Patla, when he was Prime Minister, initiated to really transform the commercial potential of these companies. So after the Asian financial crisis, a lot of companies, the GLCs were impacted, and a lot of the things done in the GLCT was actually very like hygiene, you know, how to be better at board effectiveness, how to give good compensation and benefits, and those kinds of things, right? A lot of very hygiene stuff. And when the program finished in 2015, you know, some did a lot better, some didn't do so well. But the reality is that if not for the GLCT, it's hard to imagine how the GLCs could have gotten the sort of 11% growth that they did during the 2005 to 2015 range, in part because of the commodity cycle, which was pre-financial crisis, and then the credit cycle after the financial crisis. But nonetheless, if that wasn't done, then maybe they wouldn't have done so well. But those typically are the listed GLCs, right? So you think of people like Telekom Malaysia, Tenaga, all this, which can be punished by the market, and many of them have been punished by the market. So if you look at share prices, you know, to be very honest, the Malaysian market is very anemic. And we know this, Bursa knows this, the government knows this, and we are actually, you know, something we did at Khazanah we find that the market in Malaysia, especially the KLCI, is actually priced correctly. They are priced, which means that it's actually undervalued because the earnings of the companies are weak, right? Indonesia and Singapore are a bit overpriced, but it's okay because they're still hubs, and Indonesia still have hundreds of millions of people they can go to. But the question for GLCs that comes back to underperformance ultimately is, actually, do we want to have these underperformers crowd out the economy? I think that's something that Ideas speaks about. And maybe let me sort of say that, actually, if the GLCs were to crowd out Malaysian companies, I don't think those Malaysian companies would do very well either, even if they were given free rein. And here's why. A lot of the GLCs in Malaysia, the large ones, if you look at Telecom, Tenaga, Malaysia Airports, whatever, they're actually, for the most part, doing domestic services for a country of 30 million or 40 million if you include migrant workers in Malaysia. So at some point, you are on an island, and you are competing within an island where, in biology, right, like funny things happen on islands. You have rats that grow large and elephants that grow small. And if you're just on an island and you're just competing on an island, you are jago kampung. And so even if we get private firms that can do what they do, and some of them have tried, you're not going to get a very competitive Malaysia. So what we need are companies that go outside and actually try to compete and export and try to be at least regional, if not global. And the GLCs, every time they try to go regional, they haven't done very well, admittedly, but that's because they're going to regulated sectors and so on. So I think the question on whether GLCs are crowding out, to me, is a secondary question to actually, even if they are crowding out, will the firms that would have taken their place also be competitive? And to me, the answer is not really, because they're still domestic services for a country of 40 million people. What we need are companies that actually can go abroad, can compete, can be globally, can be global export players and so on. So I do think that we do need to reframe it a little bit. Are the GLCs underperforming? Yes, the market will show that, that's a fact. But at the same time, does that mean that we can make them, or does that mean that if they weren't owned by government by some miraculous reason, will they automatically be competitive? Not necessarily. And that's in part because they're doing domestic services. So I'll stop there for now.
Okay, just to follow on a bit and maybe pick at that a bit. So I'll be devil's advocate today for all three of you, by the way, to be fair. So just on that point, right, the underperforming GLCs, let's stay with that a bit. How do you make a case? Could you make a case for underperforming GLCs? Like flat out, I mean, not even talking about the other firms who would take their place were the GLCs not to be around, right? So shouldn't the emphasis and the focus here be on transforming the underperforming ones, or really thinking about the existence of underperforming GLCs? Should they be in the market?
Well, okay, so I think first of all, yes, they absolutely should be transformed. I'm not necessarily as certain that the transformation means giving the ownership of, let's say, Khazanah's block to some tycoon who's also linked with government, right? Like then you're just changing, you're changing the owner, but you're not necessarily changing the political and economic structure. So that's one. But whether they should be in the market, if Tenaga doesn't own the grid, for example, or let's say Telekom Malaysia doesn't own the fiber. And so
okay,
on,
maybe
yeah.
let me qualify that, right? Not your public listed ones. You're talking about the unpublic listed ones, the thousands of those which we don't actually know about, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think if many of them, if we could close them, we should close them. Because I do think that GLCs can do a good job when they, good job is relative. I mean, they can do a job in trying to manage things which are a bit more natural monopolies, which are a bit more national security related, all those fine. But I think when they get into things like catering, without naming companies because media is here or whatever, then I do think it's a bit iffy, and you have to ask, why are they trying to behave as if they were conglomerates instead of trying to fulfill some societal function? And the listed GLCs, they also get asked to do a lot of national service, which actually impacts the share price. So then the question is, okay, if you want us to do that, then maybe the ones who don't have to do national service and are just doing things on the ground which maybe don't always make a lot of sense, then yeah, maybe we should think about closing them down. But I do think there is a role for the state to own enterprises that also help to drive new initiatives in the economy, especially when the private sector might not want to take the initial risk, the capex is too high, it's new technology, it's too unproven, then maybe you need somebody to be a cost discoverer for you. So I think that part, yes. But I think you're right, there are a lot of GLCs, there are GLCs and there are GLCs. There are a lot that actually go around that maybe shouldn't be there. Yeah.
Okay, I think, yeah, it is very possible to take a very aggressive approach, right? And to just say, okay, shut down the ones that are not competitive. So we're not all that. So we also appreciate, yes, national service, which is what you talked about. But I think the question which maybe we can come back to after this round is even the term national service needs to be unpacked. There is national service in terms of, yeah, when COVID happened, you get contributions of a certain sum to hospital equipment, for example. But there is also national service that is a term that is used to justify other contributions. And I think we need to be able to, speak to which parts of national service actually are positive and which ones are perhaps negative or hampering the economy. Yeah, okay. So we'll come back to this GLC question. I'm sure everyone has opinions. But I'd like to now turn to Julia. Julia is someone whose name you will see very much commenting on the economy and also now staying to this point of competitiveness. You come from a bank, you see what's moving in the market, maybe more from an investment point of view. What is it that keeps Malaysia attractive? If that's still something that we can say, please, Julia, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Tricia. Thank you to Ideas for inviting me today. And I actually found the first session very enlightening because over the last few years, my job when we speak to investors has not been an easy ride, especially when we come to the topic of politics, the political landscape, right? So what I do is I do meet a host of investors, foreign, even short-term portfolio fund managers, rating agencies, and they always ask about what's happening on the ground economically, politics, right? So I feel that my job actually as a Malaysian is really also to sell Malaysia as an ambassador. So I do try and take an objective view, and so when it comes to competitiveness, I feel that we should look at the stats. So allow me to rattle off some stats, right? Despite the last 3 years, what we've seen happen with, the change of government, prime ministers, and so forth, we actually saw a cumulative net FDI inflow of 164 billion, right, between 2021 and 2023, 164. And this is more than double of the previous 3 years. And this is despite that we went through pandemic, right, MCO and so forth. Okay, so that's for FDI. So these are this real money coming in. Of course, there's also investment approvals, which of course some have said, oh, they are just approvals, they may not actually actualize. But you can see from the FDI that some of it, well, at least 85% of it has actualized. And the investment approvals last year was a record 329 billion, up 23%. So again, a very incredible number. And when I mention these numbers to our colleagues across the causeway, they are also quite amazed at what we have achieved, right? And finally, real private investment growth, right? So this is a number that we've been looking at for a long time, okay, since 2009, 2010. And what we've seen is that in the last 3 years, the compounded growth rate of real private investments was 4.8% per annum, okay? And this compares to 1.6% pre-pandemic. So something must have happened, right? And of course, it's probably external as well because of geopolitical risk happening, supply chain diversification. We've seen a flood of funds, of money coming into the region, looking at China +1 strategy and Malaysia as a beneficiary because of the Singapore +1 strategy as well. We've obviously benefited from it, and the numbers show it, right? Okay, and that's FDI. And portfolio, I also to mention is that I think we mentioned earlier that Dr. Apura mentioned we have a very deep, domestic investor base, right? And that is actually supported portfolio inflows of over 24 billion last year into our bond markets alone, largely into our government securities. right? So there is a, I think speaking to what Tunku Zain mentioned in his opening speech, that there is enthusiasm about Malaysia outside, maybe more so from the locals themselves, but there is interest. They obviously see the untapped potential in Malaysia, and what we need to get right are obviously the policies, ensuring that economically things are stable, politically as well, as much as we can, right? Other than that, I think definitely based on the numbers, the hard data, Malaysia is attractive.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing a really positive light to, I think, sometimes we tend to have this sort of doom and gloom approach as well, but it's really good to hear that. And we do like numbers. I think if the statistics and the facts and figures show that, Malaysia still has a strong story to sell. And as you say, we do benefit from the sort of diversification that's been happening. And I do know that there is a refocus on the Indo-Pacific, for example, from the other Western powers, given what's happening in China and around the world. Maybe, can I ask you, how do they see Malaysia vis-a-vis the region? Because sometimes what we hear is we've got neighbors, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore, of course, that are running a very aggressive race. How do the investors see us in light of this regional movement?
Okay, so I think where Malaysia stands, if you talk about position, right, as far as FDI flows coming into the ASEAN region, right, Malaysia typically stands about around 5th or 6th in the past years, right? The top is always, actually it's Singapore, but again, Singapore flows, they go into Singapore, but then they get funneled out to the rest of the region. So they are like a gateway. So we pull Singapore out, right? Then of course it's Indonesia and Vietnam, okay? So we've been holding at about the 5th or 6th position, but as I mentioned, since 2018, we've climbed to the 4th position as of 2022. This is based on, again, hard stats from UNCTAD, right, and the ASEAN stats. And they look at the FDI inflows coming to ASEAN, and Malaysia ranks 4th in 2022. We've climbed up 2 positions from 6th. All right. So partly because, as I said, because of the regional trend, diversification, supply chain flows, and so forth. Also, why is it that we managed to move ahead of of Philippines and Thailand, for instance? So I'd say Thailand, we've seen in recent years because of the political issues that they have there, right? Military, government, and so forth. Obviously, some of the flows have actually come to Malaysia as a result of what's happening elsewhere, right? Even Vietnam, for instance, actually for a few years, because of graph and because of slowdown in investment approvals, we actually benefited from that and the flows coming in. So I'd say that Malaysia has done well. Again, we've climbed to 4th position. So we are just after Vietnam, Indonesia and Vietnam now. Of course, we cannot compare everything compared to them because obviously for Indonesia, they have a very large domestic market. But if you, of course, divide the FDI flows per capita, actually we are number 2. So in that sense, when you put it in that perspective, we have done well. And the question is how we can maintain that competitiveness.
Okay, so just one more question.
Yep.
How much of this positivity or this, the fact that we are actually pulling forward and pulling our weight, how much of that has got to do with what Dr. Apurva said in the morning about policy stability, right? So we're talking about stability today. Has the market actually seen, is that something that's been observed, policy consistency, policy continuity, or has there, what is it? Is there an opposite of that? What's the sentiment around that?
Okay, so I'd say yes, the issue is always that when there's a change in government, obviously even if there is a change in administration, whether the policies change, what we've seen so far is they try and look after the economy. You wouldn't want to do anything to disrupt the flows and to disrupt the investor sentiment. So I think that is something that has been relatively safe, right? But because, as I say, we do speak to a lot of foreign investors, and some of the feedback that they have given is that micro level, we could do with a lot more improvement, right? And if we manage to get that right, then obviously there is definitely scope for more investments to come in.
Okay. So again, broadly speaking, there's not going to be that much shake-up from government to government. I mean, if there is something positive that comes out from the last 4 to 5 years of government changes, there is actually very little change when it comes to the way in which the economy is run, the way in which foreign policy as well. I mean, that's not the topic of our conference today, but there's actually very little in terms of differentiation. So maybe that's something to take out of all this confusion. Thank you so much, Julia. Okay, now we come to Dr. Zuhair. Dr. Zuhair, I think, trying to think about this middle income trap that, again, Dr. Apurva mentioned, we've been stuck in for 30 years. Does the Madani economy framework address that? Maybe more on the social economic side, I'd like to ask you about, I think what you would like to share a little bit more on the social economic outcomes of where we are like. And do all these, government documents, are we seeing anything that will emerge from there? I know it takes some time for fruition, but are we seeing anything from these documents that perhaps can be celebrated at this point?
Right. Thank you, Trisha, and thank you, Ideas, for having me. I think let me start with what we seems to always talk about whenever we talk about our country's development. I think you all have seen it in NIMP, the new Industrial Master Plan, in the 12th Malaysia Plan. So the main problem is always the low value-added economic activities in the country. So how to solve it? One of the main mission in the NIMP itself is to so-called produce more complex products so that we can produce more expensive products. You can have higher income and you can produce or use a lot of talent. Basically, that's the main problem that we always see whenever we see whatever policy produced by the government. So I think I want to highlight a few things, and this is my personal opinion. We always talk about productivity. We always talk about how our workers are not productive, are not up to the standard, therefore our wages is low. I want to caution everyone. We need to look at, before we talk about productivity, we need to look at whether are we paying the workers fairly or not first, before we can talk about productivity. Of course, productivity is important. You need to increase that so that you can pay higher wages for the workers. The problem is we are not paying a fair wages to the workers. Even if you look at, again, like when Julia mentioned, we should look at stats. Look at manufacturing. For the past over 60 years, the wages being paid to the workers, the percentage-wise annual growth is much lower compared to productivity that has been generated in the existing manufacturing industry. I'm talking about giving the workers what they should get first. Of course, there is a problem of low value-added activities, etc. But the problem is we are not paying the workers fairly, number one. Number two, not only manufacturing, you look at services sector as well. Productivity increased much higher compared to wages for the past more than 10 years ago. Number three, this problem of low value-added activities through whatever investment came in the country, it has been highlighted a very, very long time ago. For example, Ministry of Economy, used to be called Economic Planning Unit, already done this study, and they said we need to get much quality investment 10 years ago, the study. Bank Negara, 6 years ago, same study, similar study. RMK 12 Malaysia Plan, the original one in 2021, also highlight that. Like literally they mentioned that our investment is low quality. I would translate that to be a cheap one, cheap investment. What do they highlight in the document? They look at the type of investment. Of course, investment can come in, whatever amount, but the type of investment itself. In 2006, like I think almost 20 years ago, almost half of our investment was in the form of ICT, digital and machinery. Almost half. But now, more than half is structure. It's more like infrastructure punya investment, type of investment. So it is not a quality investment. I'm not saying this out of my own words, but this is from Economic Planning Unit's document, 12 Malaysia Plan. Okay, and coming back to the current whatever Madani or NIMP that we have, I think I will have to agree with I think Brother Oi Kok Hin. He mentioned earlier that this government maybe are not serious to have reform. Economically, from the policy document that we currently have, I would say I would have to agree with Brother Oi Kok Hin. Yeah, we are not serious. Of course, in the document is good. For example, in a simple term, Madani, they want to give a better share of economy to the workers. And also we want to make sure that the small companies are more engaged in the economy. That's good. Okay. But it seems to be not consistent. Yeah. Number one, we, for example, in the midterm review, the 12 Malaysia Plan, they have reviewed it. The target that we want to make sure, let's say, for example, the original target was that we want to make sure 45% of our GDP come from our SME. But now it's been lowered to only 40%. Secondly, which I think the most important, that is what I talked about earlier, about fair wages for the workers. The share of wages for the workers, of course, we want to give like 40% of our GDP to the workers next year. Yeah, next year. That means we need to increase from the current, not current, like 2 years ago, our share is about 32%. The share of the 2 years ago is actually the same as the share of 10 years ago. Never changed. Then it's stagnant. Does not improve much. And how do we increase that to 40% as what we want to achieve next year? With the current policy, I don't see anything that we can do drastically to change the nasib pekerja or the workers' welfare within this 1 or 2 years. So that's why I said these are not a serious, I mean the policy itself is good, but the action being taken, I don't see anything that is significant or even drastic that can be that can change the structure of our economy.
Thanks Zuhair for your first intervention. So your points are basically around wages, right? So even if there is economic productivity, the wages are not catching up fast enough. So I think, well, I mean that's also the context behind Rafizi's progressive wage policy, which we actually haven't seen. Or it wasn't in the budget document, so we don't know what's in there. But so you talk about wages and productivity, quality investments. So maybe Julia can respond later to the quality investments part. But then you talk about reform. So what specific reform would you want to see the government implementing well to address this problem that you've just laid out? And I think, Nick, you want to respond to, I don't know, you took the mic. But Zuhair, you can answer my question first. Okay.
Okay, right.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Fundamental reform, I mean, from the perspective that I talked earlier, I think, again, coming to what we are paying our workers, I want to highlight that not only why I said the workers are not getting what they should get fairly. Number one is I already highlight about the productivity and wages. Number two, Ministry of Human Resource, they have a matrix on how to decide on minimum wage. Yeah. But, I don't know how. The amount that they always announce seems to not follow the metrics. Now, what is the metrics? They include all, and I think it's almost perfect metrics. Number one is to make sure that the workers are not poor. Number two, to make sure the workers are paid according to their current productivity. Number three, to make sure whatever amount being paid to the workers, they are able to buy their necessities, so that they will be protected against whatever increase in cost of living. And number three is following the current economic condition. So they have all the indicators. For example, in 2016, minimum wage was 1,000 ringgit. If we follow the metrics being used by the ministry itself, the wages should be, minimum wage should be 1,700 short. In 2022, what should be the minimum wage? 2,003. What is the minimum wage announced? 1,005. 800 ringgit short. Yeah. So that's why I think I highlight this. First and foremost, we have to pay the workers fairly. Then only, of course, productivity is important. It has to go concurrently. But the problem now I see is that the discussion is always talk about how do we increase the value chain, how do we improve productivity so that we can pay higher wages for the workers. I would like to caution this: if we don't pay fair wages for the workers now, forget about whatever value chain we want to get to, the workers will not get their fair wages. So if you want to talk about reform, make sure we follow that closely first, make sure the workers get what they should get.
Right. Okay. I'm sure that we views around this, and I want to go to the other topics, but just on this alone, productivity is not, correct me if I'm wrong, not just tied to the productivity of the labor, right? So you're talking about productivity of the various factors of production that go into the investments. So if it's not just a representation of labor productivity, and also correct me if I'm wrong, I think our statistics do show that the wages that we have are commensurate with the productivity, and that's why the conversation always goes back to the fact that we need to actually increase our productivity in Malaysia. Maybe I'll open, okay, what I'll do is now, so we've talked about GLCs, productivity and investments. I'd like to maybe ask the three of you to respond to each other's positions. So again, being a bit of a batu api. If you disagree with each other, feel free to say so as well, because I think, yeah, it's okay, right? We want to have disagreement on the panel as well. So I, put forward a slight point about this productivity issue. And then after that, we'll have 20 minutes or so to get questions from the floor. So maybe Nick, you seem to be wanting to say something, but I'm not sure.
No, I'm just holding the mic.
Okay.
Okay, but I think to start, maybe I'll go to Dr. Suhei's point first. I think the point on fair wages is very real. I do think that Malaysian workers don't make living wage. And in fact, actually, the stats on this is quite funny. KRI did a study on this a few years ago, which showed that Malaysia's labor income share was actually increasing. But it's increasing because we were just putting more labor in that were foreign workers. So it's not exactly like a more productive kind of thing. But I think maybe the only thing I would say is that we can't look at it in isolation as just paying workers more fairly without saying that we also need to transform the companies themselves, because if the companies themselves make their money from commodity type economic activity, so you are doing everything where you're a price taker in whether a global economy or local here or whatever, their incentive is to be the lowest cost producer ever, right? And to do that, where they'll cut is, worker salaries and things like that, keep it as low as possible. And on this front, it's actually it's actually the private companies, the tycoon type companies, the private companies that pay less wages than the GLC. So I just want to say that. But I do think that we can't. I mean, I agree 100%. We need to do that. But we have to see it as part of a bigger picture that we need to improve the kinds of economic activities we do in Malaysia. So that's what I would say. I think it's just part of a bigger whole.
Okay, so these types of economic activities, and you talk about economic complexity, are we seeing expansion in the types of investments that we get here, and therefore the types of economic activities that are conducted in our economy? Julia?
I think MIDA over the years have become more selective with kind of investments that Malaysia wants to bring in. So when in our conversations with them, they do say that if there is a big investment, they're bringing in lots of funds, but they require like a lot of labor, low value add, a need for a lot of foreign workers and so forth. The answer is no, right? So I think we have tilted over the years towards more high value add, and as we can see from the new industrial master plan, the direction is also towards higher economic complexity. So to be fair, actually, the last year's investment approval numbers, if you look at it per job created, actually the value has gone up, right? So the issue is, of course, with the wage, and that's a bit of a chicken and egg, obviously, because I think to Nicholas' point as well, the companies have to change their mindset, and that's probably what the progressive wage paper is all about, getting them to pay more. Right? But of course, commensurate with higher productivity. So something needs to change. We need to change the way we look at the jobs, look at the economic value of it. So I think we are kind of at the crossroads, and some companies still may think Malaysia as is cheap place, but we need to change that mindset. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I actually have another big category of questions to ask, but I don't think we have time, which is on ESG, because that's going to throw a spanner in the works, right? So if you talk about labor, wages, productivity, and so on. But let's get to the questions now. The first question that has votes here, and is interesting, I think maybe we'll get all the panelists to answer, is how can Malaysia address structural weaknesses in sectors such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure to support long-term economic growth? So again, I think acknowledging that we do have these structural weaknesses in education, healthcare, infrastructure, what would your response be? Let's start with Zuhair, and then Julia, and then Nick.
Right. What should be the?
How can Malaysia address structural weaknesses in sectors such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure to support long-term economic growth? I mean, you don't have to speak on all three of them, but maybe just pick one.
Yeah, I think this is a big question. Each of the section have their own issues. I would like to touch a bit on healthcare. Especially when we talk about financing our public healthcare. We seem to reach to a very simplistic conclusion, not only among the public, but also among those who are responsible to whatever design our public healthcare services. For example, I think a lot of you also have seen this in the media, in the news as well. We need to increase the fares from 1 ringgit to 5 ringgit at the public hospital. Why? The reason, because so that we can finance the our public healthcare. If we look at the numbers, even if you increase from 1 ringgit to 5 ringgit, it will not give a significant impact to the current healthcare budget. So we seem to think that, if we give 1 ringgit or we only charge 1 ringgit, the people will not take it seriously, and in fact they will continue to waste whatever, for example, medicines being given to the patient. This is what we always heard in the news. So therefore, government is increasing the fares from 1 ringgit to 5 ringgit. I think this is something that we need to change in terms of our mindset also. Yeah, we're not only to simply say, okay, if we increase the fares, then we can finance our public healthcare, for example. This is not something that we should do and not something that we should think. Why I say that? Because public healthcare will be very, very important. We even need public healthcare in the future because we are currently an aging nation. A lot of us here will live longer, but I'm not sure whether a lot of us here will be poor, but majority of the Malaysians will be poor when they retire. When you are poor, you cannot afford to go to private hospital like what we currently in this hall can afford to. Yeah. So when people cannot afford to go to private healthcare, they will depend on public healthcare. Yeah. So for us to, let's say, for example, just to give some justification to say that we need to increase the charge from 1 ringgit to 5 ringgit so that we can finance our public healthcare is very, very, I think, irresponsible. That we should think of other ways of financing the public healthcare. Maybe don't waste money on other things such as mega projects or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Samir.
I think one more point. I think I want to continue from Tuan Nick punya point just now. Yeah, I think whatever, of course we don't focus only on wages. Yeah, we should also focus on how to increase productivity and whatnot. But what I'm saying is that, let's say like what you mentioned earlier, Trisha, because of our productivity is low, our wage also is low. What I was saying is that the current level of productivity, given that this current level of productivity, our wages should not be of whatever amount that we have now. Even if you take into account the current productivity, like I mentioned earlier, the minimum wage in 2016, instead of 1,000, it should be 1,007. I'm not saying this based on, out of nowhere. This is based on their current productivity at that level. So that means it's 700, already 700 short. I think just like Miss Julia mentioned earlier, that's why the government currently is trying to, not force lah, they are trying to encourage the companies to pay higher wages for the workers.
Okay, thank you so much. On the healthcare issue, I think the government's share of the percentage contribution per GDP is actually lower than what's recommended, right, by WHO. Anyone else would like to address, I don't know, infrastructure, education? These are the questions.
So far, infrastructure, what we hear is they are quite satisfied with the infra in Malaysia. Hence, that's why they do find Malaysia attractive. I think the common ground is on talent and skilled workers. I think that's one of the challenges that Malaysia needs to overcome, and rightly so. Coming back to education, right? So, I mean, just as a mother, all right, the whole concern about education is the content of the education system, right? And coming down to, do we have the teachers, skilled, qualified teachers, to teach our future generation? So I think that's one thing that the government needs to look at. And then another is, of course, meritocracy, equality, ensuring that any student or any child from any ethnic background has accessibility to early education, primary, secondary, and even higher education, especially if they have the potential. So these are the things that we need to recognize and perhaps, and definitely address going forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicholas.
I have a solution that will solve everything in education.
Okay, great. I want to hear it.
No, really. So I've been going around telling everybody this. Nobody wants to listen to me, but I have a solution to solve Malaysia's education problem. It's legislative. We should just say that if you're going to be elected representative, whether you're in parliament or ADUN or hopefully one day local government,
I know what you're going to say.
Your kids or your grandkids must go to public school, private and secondary. So you do that, you change everything. So, and this may be a suggestion for Apurva. Maybe as a world development indicator in the future for the World Bank, you should do indicator how many % of the population goes to public school. It's a better indicator than like many other, GDP or whatever lah. But if you want to see whether a country's education system can be trusted, see percentage that goes to public school or percentage of, let's say, politicians' kids who go to public school. But you make the legislative change, and they have to do it in their constituency. So they can't just send everybody to like MCKK. You have to do it in your constituency.
Do we have that number now? We don't know that, right? We don't know the percentage.
We ask them to disclose their finances, right? We should ask them to disclose this also.
Okay, we'll put that as part of the necessary declarations in our own reform efforts. But yeah, on that note, I do plan to send my daughter to public school next year. So let's see. Yeah, I'm not elected representative, unfortunately. It doesn't fit into your matrix. So meritocracy, Julia, thank you for bringing that up. Also the elephant in the room, I think. And I now come to the question. There's a few questions actually around this topic, so I'm going to read them out. They're quite similar. Basically, will the government's stance on preserving Bumiputra rights continue to weigh down on Malaysia's economic competitiveness? And a similar one on thoughts on the Bumiputra Congress and whether there's any new policy innovation or departure from previous governments. I was there at the Bumiputra Economic Congress last week. I was probably, I think, the only Chinese there. But maybe some of your thoughts around the Bumiputra agenda, the Economic Congress, things that have emerged from the Congress over the last couple of days as well. Maybe just your thoughts, ruminations on that.
Thank you. I'm glad that this question is asked, and I was there also. I think, and I think Trisha, you are not the only Chinese there.
Okay, good. A lot.
I saw, but no, I think maybe up to maximum 5, maybe 5 Chinese I saw there.
Okay.
But I was there, and this is my honest opinion. Although I don't live long enough to watch the situation of, for example, Bumiputra and how the Congress went since 1965. Okay, but my honest opinion is that there is no significant what should I say? There is no significant resolutions, that could actually bring the development of Bumiputra up. For example, we do not know how many that they are planning to create for the Bumiputra. Let's say, for example, you want to create like 500 billion in the economy for the Bumiputra. Where do you get that? How do you get that? Who will benefit that? There's no discussion on that. In fact, the discussion was only about, number one, we need more project. Number two, we need to establish more committee, more. And I personally think it is unnecessary committee. For example, you want to establish a research center on what is the development of, the current development of Bumiputra now, which I think is useless. We don't need that, because we already have a lot of universities, a lot of research centers already doing that. What you need is to get that information from there. Another example is that they want to set up I would say a place, special place for the Bumiputra enterprise to get all the information on the research or market research on how the Bumiputra enterprise is doing. And they allocate 5 million for that. And again, I think it's useless because you can get that. It's a public document. You can get that. You can request the university to give the research to for example, the Bumiputra Malay Chambers of Commerce. So why you need to set up another one? To give you or for you to buy research publication, which I don't know whether the business enterprise will read or not. And to be honest, I am quite disappointed because it's not really clear. For example, we already have the Bumiputra Economic Transformation, I think the BTR report. So what the Congress should do is to look at it one by one and to revise and come out with another, like for example, a more meaningful target other than always talking about the equity for the Bumiputra.
I think what makes into the headline of the Bumiputra Economic Congress is how the number of Bumiputra listed in Bursa is only like one company, and I think that should not be a focus. I don't think my grandmother in Besut Terengganu will care about that. Yeah, my grandmother will not care about that. Even my uncle in Terengganu also, they don't care about that. So these are, I would say, if I can put it in a simple sentence, I think honestly Bumiputra Economic Congress is a congress for her I don't know, short sendiri people and rich Bumiputras seeking for whatever more projects that they need. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Zuhair. So I think it's important to, identify, okay, clap if you want, to identify the right indicators, right, of what represents Bumiputra, well-being. It's not just about having a name on the public listed company, so the indicators are important. Nicholas or Julia, do you want to weigh in on this at all?
Yeah, I think the question is, will it weigh Malaysia? I think it doesn't have to. The only thing I would say about this is that if we shouldn't assume that those who are in power don't know that they need to be more inclusive, don't know that all the wealth, they know. I think the question is, why are we in game theory kind of thing, in a low equilibrium versus a high equilibrium? We're in a low equilibrium, we can't get out. And the answer is actually kind of the payoffs, right? What would it take to change the payoff such that you can move to a high equilibrium? And the system is the one we need to tackle. I don't think it's for lack of knowledge that, oh yeah, we need to help more of the low income, we know all that. I think the question is, why does the system stay the way it does? And therefore, what needs to change with regards to the payoffs in the system? I think that's the better question.
Yeah, I think something that we've grappled with at Ideas as well is, I think the question of, should affirmative action along ethnic lines, should that be completely abolished, or should that be, reworked somehow? Any quick thought to that before we get to the final question here? Julia?
Just to share that when we do speak to foreign investors, they do ask about the affirmative policies, especially with regards to corporate ownership.
Corporate ownership.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they do question, and all I can say is that in this period when it's getting more competitive in the region to attract investments, I think Malaysia needs to look at policies from all angles to address how we can improve our competitiveness.
Right. Thank you for emphasizing the corporate ownership part, because I think one thing we've sort of settled on is that abolishing it completely for everything is not a right solution. So we need to take a sectoral approach, right? So if it's on education, if it's on enterprise development, or poverty eradication, there certainly would be need to have some of those included, like that kind of affirmative action. But it's not as if to say that this should be continued on a lifelong basis. So the groups that actually stay in disadvantaged positions, maybe the groups change. It may not be, Bumiputra today, or let's say Malay. It may be Orang Asli. It may be, some other category as well. Who knows what happens 50 years from now? Any other last words before I move on to the last question? No? Okay, great. Final question. Interesting one. I don't know who this came from, but this question is inspired by Trisha's green baju kurung. What do the panelists think about the prospects of green economy in Malaysia and the climate change challenge? This is an important question. We didn't get the chance to talk about ESG. Apart from green economy, I think one big major development that's going to affect our private sector is that the EU is coming up with a supply chain act, right, this year. And the supply chain act will affect 5 layers down of supply of your suppliers for any firm that operates in the European Union, more than 500 employees. Green economy, climate change challenge. Can our economy take it?
Yes, I think first you have to anyway, and we have to make a transition as a part of a company that owns a utility that is coal generated. We have to make the transition. I do think one very interesting thing for Malaysia with this is power chips, power semiconductor chips, which aren't the most cutting edge, but what they do is help to regulate power and therefore temperature. So place like this with smart buildings, everything, you can do that. But I think the other thing, I'm speaking very quickly because I know we are running out of time, is the one that's a bit underdeveloped is this idea of using Malaysia's biodiversity for growth, not just energy transition, not just like, green stuff, but biodiversity. And if you want to do something with that, the reality is that for that, the biodiversity stuff, the management of that is at the state level. It's not a federal issue by the constitution, it's in the state. Therefore, how can we, I know this is your pet topic, decentralize some of these things so that federal and state can work better together? Because I think this biodiversity thing is something that is very under-tapped globally, and there is a lot of things we can do there, but it comes down to actually federal-state revenue sharing, and how do we do that?
Yeah, and that I think resonates with the keynote address this morning as well. So I'm very glad that this subject is being discussed, not just once, twice, maybe even 3 times in the last panel. Anything on climate change or ESG perhaps?
Yes, I think Malaysia definitely has a role to play, and so far all the policies we've seen is top-down. And I think the challenge we face now is we work with the SMEs trying to also change their mindset and to look at green economy and sustainability as an agenda, right? The issue is cost, because all of this is not cheap, and a lot of it, you need foreign technology. So again, the whole idea is that you need to bring in this technology, the foreign know-how, but we need to think of it as creating another layer within industries, right, that can create more jobs, higher value paying jobs, and create extra value. And at the end of the day, if you don't believe it, all right, especially if you're an exporter, what we say is you need to comply, especially if EU regulations start to come up.
Yeah, I think the concern here though is like there's always this tension, right, between compliance and the ease of doing business, which is also important. Cost as a big question mark. Zuhair, you have the last word on this topic. You're good? Okay, so I think what we're going to do is, we're at the end of the panel, but I'd like each of you to just give your final 30-second, pitch to the audience or whatever it is that you want to leave us with. 30 seconds to end. So Zuhair, starting with you, and then we'll come back this way.
Okay, I think just a simple one. I need to see things differently. I mean, especially from the policymakers' part, don't simply announce, I don't know, maybe how many targets in the Malaysia plan we already missed. And the target was actually the original target 10 years ago. Right? And yet we still putting that target in the current Malaysia plan. So I personally, I would like to see things change drastically, and the way we do things also have to change drastically. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Zuhair. Targets and implementation. Julia?
So I think to maintain and improve Malaysia's competitiveness, we really need to have the commitment at the highest level. So regardless of what happens politically, right, I think that's very important. We need to improve on the policies, whether it's simplifying or streamlining it, as what was highlighted earlier, between federal and state, right? A lot of issues which, as an investor, as you come in, it's quite overwhelming. And thirdly, to work on labor. I think that could be the crux that may actually inhibit our potential to attract a lot more value-added investments.
Okay, thank you so much. And Nick?
The next time you see your MP or your adun, tell them that you want them to introduce this bill that will send their kids or their grandkids or their siblings' kids to public school in their constituency. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking this wonderful, vibrant, energetic panel. Thank you, Nicholas, Julia, Dr. Zuhair. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass the mic and time back to the MC. Please stay. We have a really great last panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trisha Yeo and speakers. Please remain there for a few moments for a photo session. and gentlemen, while waiting for the next panelist, do check out our game, the Pantau Dana Politik. You can access the game again by scanning the QR code for event guide on your table, and from there, click the button for Pantau Dana Politik, play the game. For your information, the game is both an educational tool as well as a survey which enables us to extract information on the public's acceptance of the Political Financing Act, which is one of IDS's primary reform goals.
Yeah, so that's the fun edition. I went with the question. We were talking with that. That. That's all right. At this time of them, people seem to be a money like power. I can get the tire now by thing. You want me that up and but the but actually get another reason thing that for instance I finished by actually about shit out the and I listen could be 10 article so factor the charity but I heard everybody use like well, some like AIDS on hand kind of and we love it. I'll get you or something. That's
Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with us. Please don't leave the hall. The next panel discussion will begin shortly.
It is about you getting going that get paid it. But I'll get you on out of the group who got all the same engine out. The trouble how does it can sound in the different value and shit that have that from nothing. And they didn't even people I don't want to head up and then it is she down and waiting there and he's like idiot dog. Go like you go out and I'm saying to me I'm acting so I'm saying like you're I'll have to realize everything but come on the people like understand the crowd thing that I mean it's like so kind of bit like this then
Ladies and gentlemen, you are all invited to please take your seats. We are about to begin the next panel discussion. A kind reminder, please do silent your mobile phones as we are about to begin the panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, you are invited to please take your seat. Our panelists are here.
Okay.
All right, moving along with today's proceedings, we will now have our panel 3, Regional Outlook. May I please invite the moderator as well as the speakers for this panel discussion to take their allocated seats on the stage. This session will be moderated by Puan Sri Murniati Yusof, IDS's COO and Senior Director of Research. And I also invite our esteemed speakers, Dr. Yanwar Nugroho, as well as Encik Shahril Hamdan, to please be on stage. Please welcome them, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Sazwan. I invite everyone to please sit and we can start our session soon. I know I'm sitting in between you and lunch, but I hope you had feeling a coffee break just now. So let's start, and Shahril, please join us.
Watch this. Hello, see, that's it.
So this is the last sessions of our conference today. This session is Regional Outlook. This is actually the first session. We usually have session on social policy usually in the MOC. But this time, because we have, I think, a very important event regionally, we want to focus this discussion on regional outlook, especially on the elections, Indonesia's election, which just completed February. So last month, I think everyone in the room aware. Okay, please I would invite everyone to please sit, and we will start our event, our discussion soon. Okay. Okay, so last month, Indonesians went to the poll to choose their president, the representative of legislative bodies in 3 levels of government, national, provincial, and also regency, as well as their senators. So this is probably the biggest single vote casting in the world. Of course, the result will only be known by, I think, 20th March, so this month, another 2 weeks. But the quick count result shows that the second candidate, which is Prabowo Subianto, and Gibran Rakabuming Raka, which is also the son of the current president, is actually winning the landslide victory. Of course, we will still need to be seen the official result, whether they will actually go straight away to be appointed as the president, or will have to go to another round of election. And also the results show that PDIP gets the biggest vote for the legislative bodies. But interestingly, and I think this is pointed out by Syahril in his famous Keluar Sekejap, that the vote for the presidential election does not correlate at all with the political party vote, right? So we'll discuss this in this last session, and we have 2 speakers here. Both of them have written and created contents on last election. So the first one with me is Pak Yanwar Nugroho. He's actually my old mentor when I was in Jakarta, so it's very nice to meet him again here. He's currently a senior fellow, visiting senior fellow at ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, but he was before a deputy chief of staff for the first term of Jokowi government. And now is also still involved in Bappenas, right, which is the EPU of Indonesia. And then Syahril, of course, we all know him. He is, I think, stylishly said, I am now a politician on sabbatical. So he's the co-host of Keluar Sekejap. He's also a former UMNO chief info chief of UMNO, and now I think he's a director of his own consulting company, giving consultation to companies who wants to open up business here in Malaysia. So let's begin our discussion today. So we have 1 hour. The first half I will ask questions to these 2 panelists, and the final half hour I will invite everyone to ask questions through this computer here, which unfortunately, it will be muted, but I will try as much as possible to accommodate your questions. So I have 4 questions, 3 probably. 3, let's limit to 3 for now. Okay. So the first question is on personality politics and party. I think Syahril has really good documentary explaining why personality politics in Indonesia is so popular, right? Look, Jokowi can get the votes for Prabowo and Gibran, but yet his party, but it doesn't correlate with the party, right? So I think the question is for Pak Yanwar especially, is this a good thing or not? The fact that personality politics, I think if we see the theory, personality politics is not good for future political party institutionalization, because that's actually is a key ingredient in democratic consolidations. Is this a good thing for Indonesia's democratic future? And if the presidential election is actually the cause of this personality politics, does Indonesia see the continuations of this model of election in the future?
Thank you, Mbak Murni. I think the question is rather tricky, because I think if we look at the history, Indonesia has been characterized by this so-called personality politics from Sukarno, Suharto, and then you name it, even President Abdurrahman Wahid, and then Ibu Megawati, and then now Pak Jokowi. I think this kind of trend will continue rather than looking at it as good or bad. But I think this is a call that party politics or the needs for political party to become stronger, to organize themselves is at the moment, I think, very, very important. Let me put it this way. I think over the past 10, if not 15 years, but it became very, very apparent in the last 5 years, the room for contestation of ideas in Indonesia has become nearly zero, shrinking. What happened the most is transactional politics, self-serving interest. If you look at the government and the parliament, for example, I will argue that in Indonesia there is no so-called opposition. No. The only opposition, if you want to mention, maybe only PKS, Partai Keadilan Sejahtera, the hardcore Islamist party. But still, it is not ideological. So everything is based on the transaction, based on the interest. This is the way the figure controls. Jokowi basically is supported by all members of parliament, all parties. The government, you like it or not, resembles a tyranny. He can do anything, without check and balances from the parliament, and sadly also from civil society. Because the same happens with civil society. No more debates on the ideals. They debate on their interest, getting donors, getting supports, programmatic. They fight each other, not for the greater good for the country, but to secure resources. With the absence of check and balances, and you mentioned personality politics, this can be really, really bad for Indonesia. But if your question is framed around that, that's how I would see it. And I think the result of the election shows how problematic it is. If, this is a big if, we take 58% of those voting for Prabowo as a real result, how would you explain that the most recent poll yesterday from Kompas revealed that 63% of Indonesians would want the parliament to question the whole campaign, the whole election, called hak angket in bahasa Indonesia. Meaning, a call for parliament to question the whole process of the election, and if it is found to be fraud, to be done the re-election. How would you explain that? If the 58 was a real result for Prabowo. I will stop here.
That's quite interesting. There's a follow-up questions, but I would invite Shahril first. So, Shahril, I think if we see Malaysia, I guess the personality politics, the way I see it, is relatively mild, right? Relatively mild compared to Indonesia, but maybe I am wrong. But how do you see, like, from your observation, Pak Yanwar talks about strengthening political party, right? What can Malaysia offer? Because I think in terms of institutionalizing party politics in Malaysia, it's a lot stronger. The party institutionalization in this country, the cleavages between political parties are a lot clearer here in Malaysia than in Indonesia. But maybe I'm wrong too. But maybe you can give some insights seeing Indonesia. You went to Indonesia, seeing Indonesia's case, and what lesson can Malaysia offer, especially in terms of party institutionalization to Indonesia?
Thank you, Murni. When I first agreed to be on this panel, my hope was to speak less about Malaysia, but I guess can't really escape. But similarly, I don't know if it's my place to suggest to Indonesia and Indonesia's democracy how best to run it. What I will say and what I will share, taking into consideration the premises of your questions, Murni, is to begin by saying that when I did the content around Indonesia's elections and concluded it in a way that spoke to the personality politics or the dimension of personality politics, for me it was multifactorial. One was the human story of it. the human story of someone like President Jokowi, who, as I understood it, rose to prominence, rose to power as an outsider. And the story of the journey from that outsider to doing precisely what supposedly he stood against years ago. Basically, institutionalizing dynastic tendencies, if I can be diplomatic in the language. The human story of Prabowo, who's tried multiple times, and how he's reformed and transformed his image from the hardliner, from the person associated with certain events in the 20th century, to someone who's now seen as a cuddly uncle or grandfather. I think there's a human story there. And the human stories of people involved and personalities involved in politics. I guess that came a bit from my own experience, but as somebody who used to be a politician, when you say politician on sabbatical, I now change it to recovering politician, which suggests that I may or may not enter back that realm. But I empathize with that humanity, I suppose, of people's journey in the practice or in the sport of politics. That was one factor of why I thought personality. The second factor was to speak of how multidimensional Indonesia's democracy is, and how that is one of many reasons why Indonesia, I think, is sui generis. It's unique. It stands on its own apart from any other country or entity. Not just in this region, but I would say globally, the diversity, we don't have to rehash that, all of us know. But even in its democracy, the dance between individuals and the parties, I think it's like nothing else I've ever read, studied, or seen. You wouldn't say the personalities are always more powerful than the parties. I wouldn't say that, right? I think that's too simplistic. Neither would you say the parties dictate how presidents get elected. Clearly, the data shows it doesn't. And the fact that there's a split vote, if we put aside Pak Yanuar's suggestions that maybe the results are less real, but say we assume that most of it is real, the split vote itself is, I think it begs question of how and why, right? In Malaysia, the most split you can get is, I split a bit my parliamentary vote and my state assembly vote, and even then, it is barely 10 or 15 to 20% of that split, right? If it ever happens. Not here, not in Indonesia. So I think those were the reasons why I thought it was such a fascinating, not just election, but a fascinating look at how our neighbors just do it differently. And to finally address the last bit of your question about Malaysia, right? Is it true? Is it different? Yeah, of course it's different. I think rather than say whether one country is more driven by personality than the other, is to appreciate how the dynamics between the two, personality and party, differs by country, by system. In Malaysia, I would argue, even though you have a Westminster system where the party supposedly hold the power, right? But personalities are extremely important if the personality happens to be the president of a particular party, right? Including may or may not one particular party that I used to be part of, right? And that's personality. It's just born out, it's expressed differently. So that's how I would take the question.
I guess
Can I something just to continue? The first time I met Pak Jokowi was in 2010. Just to give you the personal side of this. I was at the time living happily and peacefully in Manchester as a lecturer in the university. And then Pak Jokowi invited me to go back to Indonesia, to Solo. He was mayor of Solo because he was about to inaugurate the so-called Solo Technopark. He read in the news that someone from Solo was teaching in Manchester because I was profiled in Kompas. So he flew me back from Manchester to Jakarta and then Jakarta to Solo. And he himself picked me in the airport. It was the day when I knew Pak Jokowi. He told me about the reform he did in Solo. He was no one and so on and so forth. And from the discussion with him, and I think it's just a matter of time, 2012, he was elected as governor in Jakarta. And I was called back home by President Yudhoyono to help him as already deputy at the time in the office of the president. So I met Pak Jokowi again. And when he became the president, he appointed me to be his deputy chief of staff to the president. When I had the debate with Ben Bland, if you know him, writing the book about Jokowi, the man of contradictions. Ben suggested that Jokowi is full of contradiction. I would say no. He is not that contradictory. He is actually quite firm in his approach, which is very situational. Jokowi is someone who has an idea and he would suit his approach, his techniques according to the situation. And the question is actually what he really wants to achieve. I know that things can happen, people change. I myself, I resigned from the office of the president in the second birth of Pak Jokowi when I realized that the office became more political. I came to him, I said to Pak Jokowi, you may need someone else, not me. So I resigned because I think the approach to the development at that time at least did not suit my approach. So either I stay or I go, right? So in that sense, I agree that the person, everything has a personal story or personal aspect. The question is, when it translates into public sphere, when it translates into policy, I think it has much more consequences on how people will see it. Let me get one thing, which in the election I think was a game changer. When Pak Jokowi's program, Bantuan Sosial, social assistance, is, seen or was seen as the most important program, especially for the poor, the bottom 40% of the society. And the narrative by media in the campaign is that if you do not vote for Pak Prabowo, Pak Jokowi's successor, then that program will be stopped. If you belong to the 40% of the poorest in the country, it's the matter of life and death. I will stop here.
Since you comment on Pak Jokowi, maybe I can ask you, so what's your comment then on the decision in the past 4 months when he decided to then push for his son to be the candidate?
Okay. My op-ed appeared in Kompas today, full page, page 7. On the 31st of January, 2 weeks before the election, exactly, another op-ed of mine appeared also in Kompas, another full page op-ed. Unfortunately not in English, but our language is similar, right? So you can just read in Kompas. To me, it is heartbreaking, actually. I left the government, yes, 2019, and I'm not civil service. When I left Pak Jokowi in the second period, and then joined ISIS in Singapore, when COVID hit, and then I was called back home again to lead the monitoring evaluation team for COVID response and economic recovery, I went back home. I did it for Pak Jokowi. For the government, sorry, not for Pak Jokowi, but for the government. And then at the end of that, I returned back to Singapore. I joined LKY, School of Public Policy, and then for this SDGs, I was called back home again. I went back home again, do it. But, and I know that Pak Jokowi became very political. I know that some part, the extension of his term actually started as early as June 2021, when he proposed, not for the third term, but extension of his administration to 2027. I said, no, this is wrong. And I don't want to be someone who speaks behind your back. I put that another op-ed full page in the newspaper. Pak Jokowi stopped doing that. As someone who used to work with him. But it was so heartbreaking to see him advancing his son to be the candidate for the vice president. And it was ruled by the Constitutional Court. The chair is Gibran's uncle, basically, Pak Jokowi's brother-in-law. Which to me, at that time, that's the line has been crossed. So that was the situation. I know this is rather emotional, but I think that's the feeling. I know that in politics you can say that's politics, but then what kind of lesson you would tell it is okay because you think you're good, and then that you will be, continued by your son, and now Kaisang is the head of PSI. There will be subnational election in September or November this year. Do not be surprised if Kaisang will become the governor of Central Java. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Pak Jokowi will take over Golkar as the party. Back, because of the narrative as orang baik. Orang baik, good person, is good person. But democracy, public policy is entirely different thing.
Thank you, Pak Anwar. Shahril, I'm asking you as a politician.
No more.
Tak lah. Sebab I think you've been in power. I've never been in that power. What is it about power that make you do this thing? Is there no line to be like?
That's right.
No, I'm asking this because it's really amazed. Because we believe in orang baik, right? And I believe you are one of them. But if we put orang baik, it's still, power is so corrupt. How do you see this? How do you see this? And as a politician, what would be the best thing, do you think, to prevent that from happening?
So I'll be very careful not to moralize. Although I must say, listening to what Pak Anwar said, maybe I should do a piece on you, like your personal story, right? That's equally as interesting, and how you stood up for what you believed in, but you still went back when your country needed you. I think, can only imagine if there are parallels to that in this country. I guess maybe let me tackle your question slightly differently, like a former politician would, never answer a question head on, is to suggest that maybe the more interesting analysis for people on this panel, us or people here, is to think about how the Indonesia's elections is an expression of a crisis of democracy, crisis for people who believe that democracy, we won the argument for democracy. I think we have to be humble enough to assume or to entertain the possibility, rather, that not everyone buys into democracy. And that's a scary or quite an alarming prospect for anyone, whether you are a political practitioner, whether you are ideas, whether you're ISIS, is the possibility that really, globally, democracy is in retreat, right? And in that way, what happened in Indonesia and how Pak Anwar articulated it, it's no different. I mean, it is different in how it's expressed, but it is part of the same trend where ultimately more and more political figures will see evidence that if you use transactional politics, to use your term, Pak Anwar, you can do things that are undemocratic or roll back democratic principles, and you have a fair chance that a big chunk of the public and electorate will not punish you for it. In that particular instance where Pak Anwar mentioned bansos, the bantuan social, that's part of it. We can imagine as Malaysians similar type of incentives or arguments that are used for campaigns that forgive undemocratic or actions that don't appear to support democratic principles. And in Malaysia, without me being specific, because I want to be careful, maybe we ourselves over the last 12 months have discovered something about Malaysians. Even Malaysians who said they stood up for democracy. Even the Malaysians who said we will go down to the streets for democracy. In the end, it's something else. In the end, maybe the same Malaysians are happy to compromise for stability, or for the other guys are worse. So, even we have to look at ourselves and wonder, what is our relationship with democracy? And maybe that's a more interesting analysis for these times.
And let's follow up to that, right? Because I think within civil society, for example, we believe that this kind of negative forces to democracy can be prevented if we have strong institution, right? And that's why institutional reform, we have to strengthen our democratic institutions. But I guess the question is, would democratic institution withstand the forces of power like what is happening in Indonesia now, and we are seeing now in Malaysia too, where the defender of democracy themselves, actually they don't live up to whatever they said before they come to power, right? Or towards the end of their power. Is the institutional reform remain an answer for this? Sharil, maybe you want to take it.
But whether it's Indonesia, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, it would require the government of the day to push the institutional reforms, right? Of course, you can have external pressures, but it's up to government to put that as part of the legislative agenda. And clearly, in Indonesia's case, it was also up to President Jokowi to decide whether he should so openly support one camp or not, and he decided on that he should, right? In Malaysia, it's up to a particular prime minister whether I should put as part of my legislative agenda that the MACC head should report to parliament. It's up to me to put in the legislative agenda or part of my policy whether all elected parliamentarians should get the same allocation. And it's up to me. And it would be a test of my, my desire to live up to democratic principles when I'm in power. Will I do things that will reduce my influence, right? So that's So that's what it takes.
I guess maybe whether institutional reform is the answer. Of course, whether it will be implemented, that depends on who's in power. But whether the institutions is an answer to this problem of democracy.
Okay, let me take that. I still see the role of civil society is important in this discussion, including the so-called institutional reform, because the government, and if you want to take it executive, legislative, and judiciary system, they don't operate in vacuum, right? And the problem or the challenge is that civil society, at the moment, I don't know in Malaysia, but in Indonesia, is fragmented. Civil society is not consolidated. Civil society is, they are busy with their own technical or programmatic endeavors, rather than taking or tackling the most and fundamental problem of democracy or democratization. We should not forget that when we talk about everything or anything public, from what is, we cannot jump into what should be. Let me repeat. From what is, you cannot just make it what should be. If from the survey you found 90% of school students are cheating, will you make a policy that you let cheating happen? Okay? When we talk about ethics, when we talk about moral, when we talk about rules, it is not about majority versus minority. From what is, if the people let those who violate laws and ethics to be leader, will you then issue a policy that it is okay to violate rules and ethics? That's not the way we operate as a civilized society. Two terms, civility and civicness. They are interrelated. But I think that is what has been missing from if I may say, in our public discourse, especially civil society. So this is a call actually for us in Indonesia. And when I'm part of this, civil society keeps talking about the violations, about the cheating during the election. I was interviewed and I say, there are 3 don'ts. 1, don't normalize this. Second, don't tolerate. And number 3, don't institutionalize cheating and violations in the election, because it will become playbook for the next election. Now it's clear. You control the commission of election, you politicize your program, you do the so-called pork barrel politics, you will win. If no one says no about this, it will be seen as normal, it will be accepted, it will be institutionalized, it will become a playbook for whoever in power to win the next election, be they national level or subnational level. So yes, we need a strong institution. I think we need a strong institution, and here the role of civil society is important when the government is, I would say, weak. So.
Thank you. Let's go to the next round of questions. And actually, my election, I'm campaigning in mine. Okay, so we have some questions that are actually quite similar to my question, which is on old guard. And because I think one of the narrative emerged from the result is actually we are seeing Orde Baru 2.0. So the old guards of Indonesia who rules the country for decades will come back because, of course, Prabowo part of this regime in the past. So I think when we talk about Orde Baru, it's not just about Golkar, not about politics, but also political economy, right? The basis of Indonesia's economy as well. So maybe Pak Yan or maybe Syahril, do you want to start with this? I think we need to learn to, let's unpack what do we mean when we said Orde Baru 2.0 and whether is it really happening?
Okay, now let me be a bit more academic here, okay? When we talk about Orde Baru, new order under Suharto, there are some characteristics. 1, authoritarian rule. Number 2, in terms of development policies, it is, economic development policies, prioritizing industrialization, infrastructure project, foreign investment. So the government under Orde Baru at that time was very developmental in nature. Number 3, centralized power. Number 4 characteristic is crony capitalism. And then suppressing ideology. Use that ideology as a means to repress. And last one, military dominance. So if you want to see and want to check whether it is the return of Orde Baru, apply that characteristic. Are we, under the new government or under Prabowo, do you foresee authoritarian rule? Do you foresee developmental state? And in developmental state, rent-seeking society is one characteristic. Read any World Bank reports in any countries in the world. When you have developmental state, rent-seeking society is there. So the term or the way out for that, if only we can say it as a way out, is good governance. Governance would be the biggest agenda, I think, under Prabowo, if he will then be declared as the next president. Third one, centralized power. Can we see or can we foresee that under Prabowo Gibran, the power will be more centralized despite 20 years of decentralization in Indonesia? Some aspects will be re-centralized. Can we see that? Chronic capitalism, corruption, can we see that? I'm afraid, yes. I think if Prabowo will be the official winner of this election, Indonesian government, the next one, the biggest homework is to regain trust, both from national and international community. If you're a businessman, you are investing in Indonesia, what do you want to see? Certainty in law enforcement, right? You don't want, you put your money now, and tomorrow the law or regulation is changed overnight. You don't want that, right? But you know exactly that's what happened. So that then the current president can be there. You will question about law. You will question about the regulation. You will question about enforcement. So I think that is the biggest homework for Pak Prabowo. So that's how I would unpack the return of Orde Baru.
Okay, so remain to be seen, basically, right? Remain to be seen, and whether
Yeah. Because okay, I've been approached by media, and they asked me to say, what do you think about Pak Prabowo? Because I'm one of few foresighter in Indonesia. I said, I will not speak about the policy possibilities under Pak Prabowo until he is official president, because from now until 20th of October, anything can happen. The parliament can question in the hak angket. The candidates, clearly Anies and Ganjar, are bringing this matter to the Constitutional Court. We don't know the result. There is a conflict already within Golkar. There is a conflict Golkar and Gerindra, and even rift between Prabowo and Pak Jokowi. Many things will happen, and from now until 20th of October. Only after it is clear Pak Prabowo is the new president, I will talk about the policy possibilities. I will be speaking as technocrat again. But until now, I'm part of civil society, and I will be here.
I was about to, actually my next question to ask Shahril and both of you on policy, but Pak Yan, but maybe, yeah. So Shahril, do you want to comment on the Orde Baru part? Or shall we continue to the policy part where...
Orde Baru, I think so.
Yeah, and I guess there's no similarities. I mean, you know, Golkar and UMNO both are guardians, long in power. UMNO fell, but managed to climb back to power very fast. Golkar, it took so long until, well, now finally, I guess, see the light of the day. The regime will probably come back. But I guess from this, right, how do you relate this to Malaysia, and how do you see this narrative of the Orde Baru 2.0 in Indonesia?
Yeah, I again don't want to. I don't want to keep a score or give a rating. I think Pak Yano already gave us the dimension to think about whether there are tendencies towards authoritarianism, which I think, as he put it, one has to say more yes than no. But we'll see what happens after October, after November, if that occurs. I just want to maybe expand on what I said a few minutes ago about this tendency to away from democracy. I think that's a global trend, and that's something that civil society, whoever has some influence in some form, will have to rediscover our mojo, right? Wherever we sit in this political dynamic or this political space, how we rediscover a narrative that captures the masses. Because clearly there's a shift away from it. Clearly, transactional politics, I think that's the best way to put it, transactional politics is winning over ideology. You know, I think there's a claim to be made about how today in 2024 we're walking towards the end of ideology. Because what differentiates the parties in Indonesia? What differentiates the parties in Malaysia? I'm not clear. Anything I can say, you know, to really describe what's the ideology of UMNO today? What's the ideology of Keadilan, right? Of course, you can come up with the one or two sentences. You can think about vision statements, mission statements, but that's what you do in a closed setting. Is that really what people vote you on? Or is that how your political decisions are arrived at? I don't think so. I think it's arrived at through desire for power, through desire for particular arrangements, for particular short-term, medium-term arrangements that fit certain characteristics or fit certain needs of the moment. It's not any long-term ideological underpinning as to why A should be in bed with B or whatever, right? So it's not that. Now, we can excuse it and sacrifice that at the altar of stability, at the altar of we need to do this, at the altar of the world is all going
towards that direction,
towards that direction anyway. Or you can take a step back and say, you know, we're all players in this space. How can we rethink our role such that you can capture the imagination of the masses again. Because if you don't do that, you will you will basically seed the ground to populism. And populism is never about ideology. Populism is about what's transactional. Populism is what about how can I make you angry about the other and then vote for me, right? So that's really what I'm more concerned about. And I wouldn't say any one country in this region or in this world is any more or less susceptible to it. It's just a global trend that we all have to arrest.
It's a very interesting, and I guess that's probably the topic for our next liberalism conference, right? I mean, questions of ideology. People have been like, I think if you talk to young people, oh, ideology seems so bad, but actually that's what underpinning a lot of things, including the importance of political parties, right? We can't discuss it today. It's a very interesting question, but I would love to come back to that later. But Shahril, maybe we book you for the liberalism conference already. But the last questions, this is actually our last 15 minutes, exactly my question as well, right? Is on whether the Prabowo and Jokowi alliance will last. Because right now, of course, Prabowo, as everyone knows, campaign on continuing Prabowo legacy, right? But Jokowi's legacy. Whether he really wants to do it, or he really wants to carve his own legacy, and whether the alliance itself will last. Pak Yanwar.
This is very loaded question, actually. Anything political will have technocratic consequences. Any technocratic initiative will have political consequences. I think you know very well. Let me start with a hard fact. When Pak Jokowi took office in 2014, my main job was to translate his political promise into development programs carried out by ministries and sub-national government. From what he promised, I can say maybe the discount is around 40 to 50%. I'm speaking as a technocrat. Now, I look at these three candidates' promise. I dare to say the discount is at least 75%. All of them. All of them. Now, assuming big if, Prabowo will be sworn in October, I think the technocratic consequences of his political promise will be severe. He promised free milk. He promised free lunch for all school students from preschool until high school across Indonesia. The budget has been calculated 450 trillion rupiah per year. The current state budget will be deficit around 2 to 2.5%. There will be some acrobatic things happening the way you design that. On top of that, digitalization. So let me list you the keywords from Pak Prabowo. Free milk, free school lunch, downstreaming, especially extractive sectors, and you know who the big players is or are, digitalization. That's the focus of Pak Prabowo. Wednesday, 14th of February was the election. As early as Friday, 16th of February, he already canceled 3 promises. Free milk. I think we need to wait until 2029. And then free lunch. I think we need to wait until 2029. And then affordable housings. He promised to build 3 million houses per year. Let me tell you, even Jokowi failed to build 1 million houses. And I was responsible for this technocratic thing. Maybe many of you will ask, will the new capital be continued?
Yes.
Yes, it will be continued because it is already in the law. Unless you can change the law. Whoever wins the election will have to continue the development of the capital. The difference would be in the extent to which you build the capital. but it will be continued. If you ask, will Pak Jokowi and Pak Prabowo alliance last? I don't know. If you look at Indonesia's internal politics, the rift, you can already see the rifts, even now. Even now. When Pak Jokowi no longer candidate to lead Gerindra, now Pak Jokowi is eyeing to lead Golkar. Once 20th of October, the inauguration of the president will be Prabowo, not Jokowi. Remember that. The president will be Prabowo, not Jokowi. That's why I refrain to say anything, even policy, even technocratic things until then, because then I think when Prabowo becomes the president, if what he did in the past continues, because Pak Syahril mentioned that people can change, and I believe that, but I don't know as public, if in the public life he will change that much. I think Prabowo, if he continues Pak Jokowi's approach and his own approach, by embracing those who were against him, his cabinet will be big. Already rumor that Prabowo will prepare 2 to 3 vice ministers in each ministry. Easily the number of the ministers will explode from 34 to more than 100 ministers and vice ministers.
Mm-hmm.
He will create new agencies at the ministerial level to accommodate, as long as people have the ministerial position. I can understand, even I can anticipate, that the government will be large, maybe, like myself, a bit obese, big, rather slow in moving. I can imagine, and the acute problem that the government will have, maybe about governance. This is just my very, very quick look. If this continues, on top of the conflicts already happening, even in the coalition of Pak Jokowi, Gibran and Prabowo. So I would invite you to look more closely from now until March, and then from March until October. Anything can happen. Maybe rather than being, too much skeptical or too much optimistic, better if we see the situation and we respond as it happens. I agree with you that the trend of democracy, I think the shrinking of civic space has been happening from many years ago, and I think this is the time, and I think it's important for us. To me, again, back to me, this is the wake-up call for civil society actually, to really take part in Indonesia at least. But I believe, listening from what happened from the morning session, I think also in Malaysia. But that's how I will see it. Morning.
Syahril, do you want to comment on that? And maybe I guess this is your experience, right? It seems like politicians always promise the moon until things actually get real and governed, right? And you see the problem. Maybe you can comment on that as well, because yeah, as you see, even Prabowo promised the moon, and at the end of the day, it's difficult to implement.
Yeah, I want to try and move on from waxing lyrical about democracy and this retreat. I think we get the message. Maybe if I can answer a slightly different question, Murni. I mean, you tried to speak about policy. Pak Yanwas quite correctly cautioned us to not make any big bets because of the nature of Indonesia's uncertain situation in the months ahead. But to the extent that we want to try and speculate a bit and talk about Indonesia's role, maybe some guesses from me as an outsider and someone who studied a bit about the elections. My read of President Jokowi's time in power is that he seemed not uninterested, but less interested in foreign policy beyond its direct relevance to economic activity in Indonesia. So it seemed to me that foreign policy was primarily an extension of economic policy. So, using the term of our session here today, transactional, maybe a bit more transactional, right? So, can you, company X, come to Indonesia and invest? Can you, company Y, come to Indonesia and invest? And that, whatever foreign policy posturing I need to do to get there, I will do that, right? I think it's telling, everyone's kind of read how he didn't spend much time in global forums, on global forums. I don't think the non-fluency in English was really affected at all because, happily people would have still welcome and he would have still been able to make a go at it in Bahasa Indonesia. That's not anything different, but clearly that wasn't his focus. Maybe until more recent years when G20 and ASEAN chairmanship, almost by default, he had to do something. But otherwise, his space in the foreign policy conversation wasn't the most prominent compared to maybe SBY. And my guess, just looking at what Prabowo is like in the past, has been like in the past, he's a bit more of that old school, I want to be out in a global forum type guy, right? I've seen him speak and in Singapore, I've seen him speak in other forums. He seems at home at that kind of settings. So does that tell us anything about Indonesia's foreign policy? Not necessarily, but it tells you that Indonesia and its president is likely to be more engaged in these discussions. So that is something we ought to look forward to, and how he responds. And something tells me that's going to be one of his main focus. Legacy building. Politicians in general, many of them, not us, many of them, care a lot about legacy. And they imagine how people would think about them once they're not around anymore. And it seems that, if Jokowi was really about developmental politics, it was really about how he transformed Indonesia's, even the physical space in his own image, or his own policy. Prabowo might be a bit more of because of his military history, so I think that's something we can sort of tentatively anticipate. Beyond Prabowo per se, beyond the individual per se, my hope, I guess, is for Malaysia and Indonesia's relationship to also open up a new chapter. We see what's the genocide that's happening in Gaza, how the Arab world, if I can say so, doesn't seem to be standing up to its promise and falling far short of it. Not saying that Malaysia and Indonesia will necessarily do much better, but maybe it's our turn to have a go at some form of Muslim leadership, if there is such a thing to aspire to. And I'd like to see that happen in my lifetime.
Yeah, I guess, well, you talk, maybe just final one, I think. You talk about paksi kuasa, Indonesia as a paksi kuasa, and you said that Prabowo maybe will be a little bit more active. Do you see Indonesia would assert like a more, not only to be present, but a more active role under
If I can have a quick go first as an outsider, right? I think, and this is not a fully fleshed out thought, so please don't hold me to it. I feel in my tentative thinking, the two countries in this region that I wish was more ASEAN is Indonesia and Singapore, right? Because I feel like, okay, let's go with Singapore first. There are times I feel like Singapore, because it's so apart from the rest of our neighbors in terms of its developmental status, sometimes it thinks global first, right? It does check out from ASEAN, and it sees itself in the understandably. Indonesia, because of its sheer size, I don't know if it's leaning into ASEAN as much as I hope it will. So to your question, paksi kuasa, right? Yes, it is. It has the potential. It has that latent potential to do something beyond just for Indonesia, qua Indonesia. It could be something a lot bigger than that. The Ummah leadership in some form, right? It could be about taking leadership about how ASEAN and Southeast Asia deals with China, deals with the great power rivalry, and take a leadership role in that. And that will require, Prabowo or whoever is the next president, even over time, to really take that mantle. Because otherwise, you've got two countries who, for different reasons, are globally significant, maybe not using ASEAN or Southeast Asia as the channel through which to influence things globally.
Really, thanks so much. Pak Yanwar, maybe the last, you want to comment on that? On Sharia, I think it's a really good point. And I know at this point it's still tentative, but maybe you can provide some insights.
Let me just follow this up from Pak Syahril. I think whatever happens in Indonesia, and again, let's wait until October. I think you like it or not, we are neighbors. Indonesia will play its role in ASEAN, and I think it's important to be able to identify, to map out the possible collaborations. Again, if we speculate that Pak Prabowo will be sworn in October as president, I agree with Pak Syahril. I think the foreign policy posture would be more active compared to under Pak Jokowi. For your records, for 10 years, Pak Jokowi only attended one UNGA, and it was online during COVID. Pak Jokowi did not really care about UNGA, really. I took this matter personally because I advised him in 2015 for him to attend the UNGA, and he said no. In bahasa Indonesia, saya hanya mau datang ke pertemuan yang ada buahnya. I will only attend to a meeting which has a concrete fruit for Indonesia. Apa istilahnya? Speak only, in the UN for Pak Jokowi. I think it's rather different compared to Pak Prabowo. But I think, and I agree, the economic motive is quite high, and Pak Prabowo, I think, will follow that. But again, as neighbors here in ASEAN, I think in Southeast Asia, I think it's important for us to collaborate, to work together each other, and to learn from each other, and especially again. Please, bear with me if I keep saying, especially collaboration among civil society. Among civil society, I don't know how close you are in Malaysia with your colleagues in Indonesia, or my colleagues in Indonesia with you here. But I think with the trend of shrinking civic space, challenge to democracy, if you want to put it, digitalization, climate change, and everything else on top of political change happening in the region, I think it is time for us to be closer. Yes, together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been one hour. I know that I have an interesting question, many interesting questions, and I hope we answer some of these questions. There are questions on strong men, a strong institution, many things in addition to policy questions. I'm very sorry for not being able to entertain some of these questions, but I have our discussion cover and answer. And feel free to talk to the speakers when we have lunch later on. So I will thank you so much, Pak Anwar, Syahril, for really insightful session, and I will return it back to Anwar. Anwar pula to Syahril. Thank you. To Syahril, to Shazwan.
Thank you, Sri Murniati and the speakers. Please remain on stage for a quick photo session.
This shot, like, yeah. I'm the good on and put I can hear man's for the other two companies. Bye. Am I really small? Give me one way, but not tough one. And it's
Okay.
talk what will. All right.
To close this year's Malaysia Outlook Conference, I invite Dr. Trisha Yeo to deliver the closing remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to give a really short thank you to all of you, guests, panelists, all speakers of today. Thank you for joining us in our Malaysia Outlook Conference 2024. What started during the pandemic and now has transformed into something live. Today we've heard so much about so many different topics, the importance of robust institutions as we navigate ethnic religious tension, the importance of figuring out federal-state relations, my pet subject, contributions from East Malaysia, and not least as well. Looking at how we can improve Malaysia's competitiveness abroad, we dealt in the economic panel on so many issues, including quality investment, wages ultimately, and of course, the question on GLCs that has not yet been resolved. And finally, we've heard this wonderful panel. We had the privilege of having Pak Yanwar with us from Indonesia. Thank you so much for flying all the way here to KL. And I think this is definitely a great start for increasing and expanding the space of civil society, of academic think tank networking to boost Indonesia and Malaysia relations. But I think the takeaway, of course, from all this is that there's so much more that we need to discuss, to unpack. The last panel reminded us that democracy can indeed quickly slide, and I think that's a question in the last few years already. We are in democratic recession. What is the alternative? There is none at the moment, but we hope to explore this in the Liberalism Conference later in September this year, which by that time we would still not see the Indonesian president sworn in, right? So 20th of October, we'll all be looking forward to that. Finally, I like to thank once again the Canadian High Commission and also Friedrich Naumann Foundation for their support. I hope that just this morning's conference probably leaves you with more questions, but that we will try to answer as many as we can along the way, continue to follow ideas in our endeavors to make Malaysia's institutions stronger, both economic and in government, political, parliament, and so on. We strive our very best, I think, through our civil society efforts as a third and an independent sector to highlight the strengths of Malaysia, but also be an important sounding board and providing criticism where criticism is due, and of course, reforming the institutions that will continue to uphold our democracy and our economic, our political economy now and in the long run. Thank you so much for your time and for your support. See you in our Liberalism Conference this year. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Trisha. Ladies and gentlemen, they say all good things come to an end. Similarly, today's Malaysia Outlook Conference is coming to an end as well. Banyak kelok kepenari, kelok tumbuh pohon kuini, nan elok bawalah balik, nan tak elok tinggallah di sini. On behalf of Ideas Malaysia, we would like to express our sincere appreciation and heartfelt gratitude to all contributors and participants in making today's event a success. Before parting ways, on behalf of Ideas Malaysia, again, we would also like to express our great appreciation to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, FNF, as well as the High Commission of Canada in Malaysia for their support towards the Malaysia Outlook Conference and Ideas. This event will not be possible without their utmost support. Batang selasih permainan budak, daun sehelai dimakan kuda, bercerai kasih bertalak tidak, 1000 tahun bertemu juga. Di atas dahan burung tempua melihat rusa tepi perigi. Salam perpisahan untuk semua, di lain masa bersua lagi. We thank you greatly for your participation and we look forward to meeting you at the 5th Malaysia Outlook Conference next year. Please remember to play our game, Pantau Dana Politik, and do share it with your friends, family, and professional networks. The data extracted from your usage of the game will be invaluable to inform us in our advocacy work to fight for political financing reform in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, before we end, let's have a final photo session. I would invite everyone to please come forward to the front, maybe around here.